We are very excited to share with you this afternoon's presentation that'll feature reviews of selected Grade 5 and Grade 6 Araling Panlipunan textbooks. Their review, as we shall see later, focused on the following components: the foundation story and main narrative of the Philippines, some inaccuracies, civic goals and values, and finally a note on martial law. I am Jai Rojeria of the UP Department of History, and it is my honor to be the virtual host and moderator for this afternoon's forum. Today's forum is presented to you by the FEU Public Policy Center. We formally begin with the forum in a few minutes, and while waiting for the other participants to enter the meeting, may we call your attention to a few reminders as we conduct this forum via a Zoom web conference. To all participants, please ensure your display name has your full name and your organization. You may do so by going to your Zoom profile page. Kindly click Edit beside your account name, and then put in your first and last name and click Save Changes. To ensure the clarity of our presenters' voices, we are muting all participants by default. Kindly click on the microphone button to be unmuted if it's your turn to speak. To ensure uninterrupted streaming, you may turn off your video and close non-essential internet browsers, windows, and apps, especially those that are bandwidth intensive. A moderated open forum follows shortly after the presentation of the textbook review. You may enter your questions or comments in the Q&A portion. Please bear with us as we have a limited time of about 20 minutes, but we will try to accommodate as many questions as we can. We also wish to inform you that for documentation purposes, we are recording the entire event. We will announce any need for a time extension during the open forum. Also, we encourage you to post about this virtual event on social media. Please tag at FEU Public Policy Center on Instagram and use the hashtag #TwistedTruths. If you are on Facebook, we also encourage you to like and follow the social media pages of FEU, FPPC, and the UP Departamento ng Kasaysayan. If you have friends or colleagues who would like to join us today, this virtual event is streamed via Facebook Live on the FEU, FPPC, and the UP Departamento ng Kasaysayan pages. The links will be shared in the chat box shortly. To formally start our virtual event, may I please call on Dr. Michael M. Alba, President of Far Eastern University, to deliver his welcome remarks.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the seminar of the FEU Public Policy Center that is fashionably and intriguingly titled #TwistedTruths, the Dilemma of Philippine History Textbooks. Fashionably titled, given the use of a hashtag, which Twitter users do to give the topic a larger context, in this case, heightened concerns about historical revisionism, as well as to make it easier for the madding crowd to follow and hopefully push it to trending status. And intriguingly titled because it immediately raises the provocative question, "Que horror, are Philippine history textbooks purveyors of lies?" In any case, we all know that the Philippines has an endemic learning crisis. Even before the pandemic, Filipino learners already performed dismally in international large-scale assessments. Our 15-year-old students had the dubious distinction of coming out last out of the 78 participating countries in PISA 2018, and our grade 4 students duplicated the embarrassing feat in a field of 64 countries in TIMSS 2019. A less well-known fact is that during the pandemic, specifically for the period April 1, 2020 to August 31, 2021, out of the 210 countries for which data were available in the UNESCO database, the Philippines was the worst performer on both school closures at 46.4 weeks and academic breaks at 27.7 weeks, which meant that Filipino students experienced the longest durations of no in-person schooling and of no schooling. But perhaps it is not sufficient to focus our attention only on the learning of the 3 Rs or on school attendance. Could it be that the roots of our education crisis also lie in how history has been and is being taught to Filipino students, so that we have failed to form a well developed Filipino identity and, in turn, a sense of country and civic responsibility in the vast majority of our citizens? Has this been a factor in our choice of political leaders? Has this resulted in the delivery of education that has not inculcated student agency or student ownership of their learning goals, so that our students have been merely passive recipients of instruction? This afternoon, FPPC trustee and UP Professor Emeritus Serena Diokno will present the key findings of an FPPC commissioned study that she led, which reviewed the history textbooks that are currently in use in schools that participated in this project. The study sought to answer the following questions.
Huh?
What shared narratives
No, I don't.
do the textbooks present
No.
about the Philippines and her different stages of nationhood? How do the narratives inculcate a sense of civic mindedness in grade school children? Are there inaccuracies in the historical narratives? And if so, how can these be corrected and improved upon? In this endeavor, she was ably assisted by Assistant Professors Kirby Alvarez, Francisco Jaime Paulo Giang, and Don Di Pepito Ramos II, and Mr. Aaron Viernes, all of whom are affiliated with the History Department of UP Diliman. We owe them our thanks for the arduous work that they have undertaken, which shines a light on a problem that has festered and may have had many unintended consequences for Filipino society. Maris, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. And marami pong salamat sa inyong pagdalo sa ating webinar ngayong hapon. Pinakilala ni Mike yung aking mga kasama. Actually, they did all the research for the textbooks, and we discussed these over all the almost a year that we've been working on the project. Sige. I will do part of the presentation and I'll pass you on to the rest of the group. Let me start with the introduction. So as you can see, we reviewed selected textbooks sa grades 5 and 6 which teach Philippine history. So anong background nito? Very quickly, the FEU Public Policy Center had started with a project a couple of years ago tungkol sa pagtuturo ng Araling Panlipunan. No? Hindi lang yung pagtuturo kundi ang mga textbooks. So itong bahagi ng textbook, yan ang aming i-present ngayong hapon. And these are the schools who participated in the project. There are 5 FEU schools, basic ed schools, and each of them has their own textbook. And then Baliwag University also has a basic ed school, University of the East, and CEU. So all in all, we reviewed 6 textbooks plus the depth ed textbook. So 7 textbooks for grade 6 and 7 textbooks para sa grade 5. And the overall aim was to see how teaching and learning of social studies could be improved given today's conditions. So ito yung mga textbooks na ni-review namin sa grades 5 and 6 mula sa Baliwag University, sa CEU, of course yung DepEd textbooks, FEU Cavite, FEU Diliman, FEU Roosevelt Colleges, and the University of the East. Okay, so just for context, these are the overall goals of the DepEd, what the DepEd calls civic goals, mga kakayanang pansibiko, which really deal with identity construction and a sense of pagkamamamayan or citizenship, and then the content of Araling Panlipunan, and then the skills. Actually, this is what you have there for the competencies is just a very short summary. If you read yung gabay ng Araling Panlipunan Curriculum ng DepEd noong 2016, nakalista, medyo elaborate, no? Yung listahan ng mga kakayahan na dapat matutunan ng mga estudyante. Now, sa particular, sa grades 5 and 6, we have a general objective, you see, to shape the consciousness of citizenship and love of country. And then in grade 5, you have the specific competence, which looks at Philippine history from the earliest period until, well, we will show you the period covered. And then grade 6 focuses on the more contemporary period, let's say 1900s until the present. So just a quick background, we made certain premises in the course of this study. The first set has to do with the nature of social studies textbooks, and typically these are assumed to be just a body of information that reports facts, no? Pangalan, pecha, saan nangyari, mga pangyayari, and so on, and usually organized chronologically. Of course, textbooks prescribe what should be learned, and by implication, if it's not in the textbook, presumably that need not be learned unless you have an Araling Panlipunan teacher who makes the effort, no, to develop learning resources that can augment what the textbook does not cover. Textbooks tend to be written in an authoritative voice. Okay, it's assumed that the textbook writer has authority and that what the textbook writer says is factual and is accurate. And then authors are also invisible. We don't even know who they are. When most people refer to textbooks, they say the textbook says. Of course, we know no textbook is written by itself. No, there's an author behind the person. But the perception created by the invisibility or anonymity of the author is that the textbook is objective, that they report facts, it's free of interpretation and perspectives. However, as we know, the content of a textbook is determined by somebody, even how it is organized. And in general, that content in our country is determined by the Department of Education. Okay, so sa Araling Panlipunan, nakadetalye ano yung dapat sasakupan ng Araling Panlipunan sa bawat baitang. And textbooks are, of course, expected to comply with the content prescribed by the Department of Education. The textbook content is, of course, not equally significant. You will find some details there that are useful for background or context, while other information is essential. Now, we are making an assumption here that users of textbooks, especially teachers, distinguish between what is essential information and what is background. But as our study of the pedagogy demonstrated, which we reported in February last year, the tests that are given to students ask about both essential and non-essential information. Now, finally, textbook writers do interpret, and sa pag-aaral na ito, marami kaming maipapakitang halimbawa ng interpretasyon ng mga textbook authors. Marami din sa usapin ng batas militar, to which we devoted a whole section of this review. And it is evident that textbook writers do have a perspective. Now, the other premises that we made deal with the practices of textbooks here in the Philippines. So the first, of course, is that the DepEd looks upon the textbook as the transmitter of official aims of the educational system. So sa usapin ng Araling Panlipunan, the textbook is supposed to comply. Well, actually, in all subject areas, no? Second, we found in our earlier study, that teachers rely heavily on the textbook in their daily practice. In fact, I would say for most of them, that is the primary authority of history and historical fact. Third, his teachers generally assume that textbooks are correct and the facts that they report are all significant. And let me jump to the fifth premise, that if there are any errors in the textbook, the teachers generally don't think that's their job to point out. They generally leave this to the department itself or to historians or to the public, sometimes congressional hearings. Our fourth premise, teachers also assume that textbook writers do not interpret, but simply report facts. So even when the textbook writer is clearly to us historians expressing an interpretation or opinion, that is sometimes construed as fact or is not necessarily questioned. Our last premise is that of the private schools, not all private schools have articulated policies and procedures, no, sa selection ng mga textbooks. Of the 6 schools that participated in our study, we found that only 2 had actual standards and procedures for textbook selection. So what is evident to us is that the textbook is as much for the teacher as it is for the student. And perhaps the reason we say this is because if you look at the background of our Araling Panlipunan teachers, grades 5 and 6, and of course the lower grades, history is not a required course in the curriculum. Ang kinukuha is teaching of social studies. And teaching of social studies has a strong pedagogical bent, but the content of historical knowledge, of course, is another matter. So we had 4 basic review questions. What is the main narrative of Philippine history as a whole and by period? What sorts of inaccuracies do we see? How is civic mindedness expressed? And then a special one on how martial law is explained, and my colleagues will present each of these sections. So I'll just do the foundation story. This is how the overall story looks like, okay? Grade 5 history starts with prehistoric, earliest period, until 1815. 1815 being the cutoff point. That was when the galleon trade ended, and the Philippine ports were subsequently opened to foreign trade, and the Philippines became an active participant in world trade. It's an interesting cut-off event used to cut off, because most of the events used to mark off these historical periods are political. So in grade 5, you have one section that talks about the earliest period up to 16th century when Spain came. The next one looks at the 16th and 17th centuries, and then you have 18th century up to 1815. Of these sections, perhaps the most developed would be the first one, the earliest period, 1700s, not so well developed. Now, grade 6 is more contemporary. Mag-uumpisa siya sa 1815 and then up to 1898, which covers the revolution against Spain. And then 1899 to 1945, which is the Philippine-American War, up to American period and Japanese occupation. And then independence, 1946 to 72. And then 72 up to the present. So 1972, the imposition of martial law is clearly a watershed, an important period in contemporary, in the modern period. So if you look at the history, it's quite linear. Periods are usually marked by war or political parameters, except, as I said, for 1815, which refers to the galleon trade. Now, the way the textbooks are organized within each time frame, then there are themes that are taken up. And since 1946 up to the present, the textbook is organized by presidential administration, with martial law, imposition of martial law as a turning point. All right, so here's what the storyline looks like. The periods that are marked, that are screened, refer to grade 6. So the grade 5 period, we tried to summarize the story in one, at most 2 sentences per chronological period as described in the textbook. So, syempre, what's very strong in the earliest period is that we had our own culture, our own tradition, and that we were, how do you say, engaged, with our neighbors in Southeast Asia, part of the Austronesian community. Okay. 16th and 17th centuries refers to Hispanization, strong discussion here of Christianization, the resettlement of indigenous populations into initially parishes and later towns and so on. Changes, of course, in land and livelihood. No? Then from 18th century up to 1815, this is where you have attempts of Spain to conquer what they consider the periphery, parts of the colony that they couldn't reach, both in the north and the south. And this century ends with economic reforms. Again, these are not thoroughly discussed in the textbook, but they are included in the scope of the historical period. Now, sa grade 6, mag-uumpisa sa 1815. So, medyo exciting itong opening ng textbook because ito na yung pag-usbong ng pambansang, some kind of nationalist sentiment that culminates, of course, with the revolution against Spain and the war for independence against the United States. And then during the American period, the Americans are portrayed as modernizers. Sila yung nagpakilala sa atin ng maraming mga inobasyon sa governance, sa edukasyon, infrastructure, trade, and of course, part of this also includes the occupation of the Philippines by Japan. And then 1946 to 72, ito focuses on internal and external challenges to Philippine independence as a new republic. So internally, may discussion, halimbawa, ng mga post-war hoop rebellions, agricultural agrarian problems, and then of course, yung ating ugnayan sa Estados Unidos, parity, military bases, I think were also discussed. But as I said, this period is discussed by presidential term. And then the last part, 1972 to the present, very clear. The discussion here is all about democracy and the threat to democracy that was experienced during the period of authoritarian rule. And so there is discussion here about how Filipinos tried to struggled to try and develop a democratic society. There is a discussion of contemporary issues. Of course, the more recent ones, like the West Philippine Sea, are not well covered. The arbitral award ruling came only in 2016, and most of these textbooks were published in 2016. A few were published the following year. So the coverage is not that exhaustive. So because of the emphasis given to martial law, we decided that we would treat this as a separate section in our review. Now, these are basic findings about the overall story, that the basic narrative is a struggle for freedom. And of course, we find that this narrative is apt historically. However, this means that by the end of the year, the student should be able to understand or explain, number one, what it means to be free, and number two, what it means to be a nation, because that seems to be the thread that cuts across the storylines by century or by historical period. However, these two outcomes are not apparent either in the textbook or in the curriculum of Araling Panlipunan. As for the textbook approach, we mentioned it's a linear approach. It does provide a chronological anchor for events, although you will see in Gio will explain, we found some errors in some of the chronologies. But we find that this linear approach has an overemphasis on political developments and neglects some of the significant non-political developments. In terms of chronological organization, there is an emphasis on contemporary history. Much more period time is given to that. So the impression that the modern period and martial law are not taken up in the textbook is not a correct impression. In fact, that's the reason why sa K to 12 hinati ang kasaysayang Pilipinas sa 2 taon. Kasi sa pre-K to 12 textbook, tinatalakay ang kabuuan sa loob lamang ng 1 taon. So hindi talaga naaabot ng teacher yung modern period, especially martial law. That hardly ever gets touched. So in K to 12, the history was divided into 2 years so that grade 6 can give more ample discussion of the 19th and especially the 20th rather and the 20th centuries. Okay. Some of our comments about the chronological organization, we think there is well, to be more accurate, what the separation here is between the revolution against Spain and the Philippine-American War. They spring from a similar root, and we think maybe they shouldn't be separated from one another. One of our concerns about treating the post-war period by presidential term is that it's not very helpful in tracing the development of issues that cut across presidential terms. So you will not find even discussions of these issues across presidential terms. Yes, it's important that 1972 is a political milestone and is highlighted, but our last section will explain to you exactly how this is treated and our concerns about how martial law is explained. As for the thematic content, again, generally oriented toward political events, there is some tendency to attribute political agency or historical agency to others or to agents other than the Filipino people. There is not enough discussion of perhaps popular movements. There's little or no attention given to new histories that we think are important. Histories of indigenous communities. There is some of the Muslim and of the northern communities in northern Philippines, but they are not integrated into the narrative. So these are our recommendations with regard to the foundation story. We think that the British occupation of Manila deserves attention. It's largely neglected in the textbook because this not only because the British occupied Manila, but more because of the impact and the subsequent developments and the reforms in the colony that took place in large part as a reaction to the occupation. We did mention that the armed movements for independence against Spain and the US should be woven in more coherently. We question the periodization by presidential administration. There is a tendency to attribute the historical agency to the president or political elites, and it doesn't allow the treatment of issues over time. We would like to see more thematic discussions of significant issues by the time periods identified in the textbook. And of course, we would like to see non-political content. Given, for example, the massive changes in climate that young people are currently witnessing, they might be able to appreciate maybe a greater understanding of let's say, history of earlier natural disasters. We mentioned some here that on the slide as samples. Given again the COVID pandemic, might be interesting to include the history of early pandemics. The cholera outbreaks in the 19th century were especially significant, as we indicate in the slide, and maybe add a section on the role of women in history. Well, actually, even other sectors in society. We would like to see the textbooks maybe introduce relevant and developmentally appropriate primary sources. We see a few in the textbook, very, very few, but they're usually ornamental rather than essential learning resources. For example, you will see later that the Boxer Codex illustrations are used, but they aren't analyzed as such. And we know that there are many other examples of primary sources that can be used. The best way to understand, for example, the reform movement is to read a bit of Rizal or Del Pilar or Katipunan. Not the whole thing, of course. That's why we emphasize the term developmentally appropriate, because we realize that grades 5 and 6 children there are pedagogical considerations for each grade level. And then, of course, we would like to see the historical inaccuracies corrected. So let me turn you over to Gio Giang, who will present to you the historical inaccuracies. Thank you. Gio, it's...
Hey, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Oh, salamat din. This is yours. Let me
Okay.
just...
So, thank
Okay.
you, Dr. Diokno, for that insightful discussion on the foundation story of Philippine history. I'm Gio Giang, and I will discuss evidence of historical inaccuracies that our team found in selected grade 5 and grade 6 textbooks. Next slide, please.
Sorry.
So we did our assessment on historical inaccuracies based on these 7 typologies, as you can see in this slide. Biases, debunked or outdated theories, factual errors, unfounded statements or generalizations, mismatched captions from photos, vague statements or vaguely worded statements, and interpretations pretending to be objective. So these are the main parts of this specific section on inaccuracies for this presentation. Next slide, please. So we begin with examples of outdated theories. This lengthy excerpt here is a perfect example of a discussion in one of the textbooks that give emphasis on outdated and debunked theories about the origins of the Philippine archipelago and the Filipino people. Here, the specific textbook gives a long explanation on the biblical creation story and even a debunked Lemurian theory in order to trace the origins of the archipelago and its people, rather than giving emphasis or citing other important scientific theories like, let's say, the Austronesian migration theories, which is completely absent in this particular textbook. Next slide, please. In the first bullet point of this text, of this slide, the same textbook, along with other 2 textbooks, give apparent emphasis on Henry Oatley Bayer's waves of migration theory, which is already an outdated scientific explanation on the peopling of the Philippines. The following bullet point by another textbook commits a mistake on the institutional affiliation of Wilhelm Solheim. The authors of that textbook discuss also Solheim's theory, but makes no mention on the Nusantao or even the Austronesians. The authors also wrongfully claim that Solheim's theory was based on Felipe Landa Hocano's core population theory. Next slide, please. In some textbooks, our team noticed that authors falsely attribute Filipino traits to our former colonizers. This lengthy passage here is from one textbook that attributes to the Spanish some of the more infamous Filipino traits like the bahala na attitude, and this list goes on in the next slide. Next slide, please. Or even the mañana habit of the Filipinos, which they claim we got from the Spaniards. Yet these claims have no factual basis whatsoever. So these are mere generalizations that the authors put in their textbooks. In the second bullet point of this slide as well, for example, textbook authors of another textbook claim that American colonization affected the Filipinos' respectful attitudes towards the elders. Again, just like the previous slides, these are they have no factual claims. I'm sorry, this is in the next slide. Next slide, please. So this particular bullet point, the second bullet point, where the authors of another textbook claim that we lost our respectfulness because of the American way of life. Like the previous examples, these are no factual basis whatsoever. Next slide, please. Our, our team found many types of biased statements in the textbooks that we reviewed. For example, in the first bullet point of this specific slide, a textbook uses the term Diyos-Diyosan to describe pre-colonial worship, which seems to be very derogatory. This is a perfect example of a religious and cultural bias against our pre-colonial traditions. Another example of an ethnic bias can be seen in this passage on the fourth bullet point in this slide. The discussion is very lengthy. It continues to the next slide. Next slide, please. And this discussion tells the reason behind Filipino colonial mentality. The statement claims that colonial mentality was because our pre-colonial culture is, as the textbook authors claim or imply, is inferior to other civilizations like India, Vietnam, or Cambodia that were engaged in building monuments and structures. So this is clearly a bias against our pre-colonial culture, wherein the textbook authors make an unfair analysis or an unfair statement when the textbook authors compare our pre-colonial traditions to that of India, Vietnam, or Cambodia, as cited in this passage. Next slide, please. Our team also found a series of discussions from another textbook that exhibit political bias against the Hukbalahap, for example, as exhibited in the passages cited in this slide. According to the textbook authors, the Hukbalahap simply wanted communism to take hold of the country because of this biased explanation. What is left out is the chance to explain to the readers the agrarian problems of the country at that time, which the Hukbalahap sought to change at that time as well. Next slide. Our team found many factual errors across all textbooks that we reviewed. I will only discuss several examples of factual errors per slide, but please take note that the factual errors are identified in the presentation in red font color or are underlined. For this first slide, a glaring example can be seen in the second bullet point, where it was actually Garcia Jofre de Loaiza and not Francisco who headed the 1525 Loaiza expedition, and Sebastian Elcano, not Cabot, took over the expedition after Loaiza's death. For the third bullet point in this slide, the cited date, 1574, is quite confusing. Do the textbook authors refer to the 1571 Battle of Bangkusay on the channel in Tondo, or the 1588 Tondo Conspiracy Revolt? No further explanations were provided by the textbook authors. Next slide. In the first bullet point of this slide, another textbook cited the wrong date, 1574, to explain the end of the encomienda system. Encomiendas lasted until the 17th, and then some lasted until the 18th centuries. So this is very inaccurate. The third bullet point of this slide, another textbook cited wrong dates as well. Lopez Haina died on January 20, 1896, and not on January 1890, while Juan Luna died on December 7, 1899, and not on July 4, 1890. In the next bullet point, another textbook makes a wrong claim that Bonifacio headed Magdiwang in northern Luzon. Bonifacio did not, and Magdiwang is a Katipunan chapter in Cavite in the south of Luzon. In the fifth and the sixth bullet points of this slide, two textbooks mistake Emilio Aguinaldo as the head of the Magdalo. It should have been Baldomero Aguinaldo. And one of those textbooks claimed that Magdiwang is actually based in Manila, where it is not. It is based in Cavite, and it was not headed by Andres Bonifacio, but by a Caviteño, Mariano Alvarez. Next slide. For the first bullet point of this particular slide, textbook wrongly claims that Aguinaldo's forces fled Cavite because they wanted to get sympathy from Katipuneros in the north. What actually happened was the Spaniards focused their military campaigns in Cavite, thus forcing Aguinaldo and his troops to retreat to Biak na Bato, Bulacan. The following bullet point of the same textbook wrongly claims that Filipinos or mga mamamayan participated in the Malolos Congress. This is wrong because delegates to the Malolos Congress were actually appointed. In the last bullet point of this slide, another textbook implied that there are no sources to prove the conditions of the country during the Philippine-American War. This is not true because there are actually sources from the Office of the Historian of the U.S. State Department that can attest to this, and this can be accessed online. Next slide, please. Okay, in this slide, this is what Dr. Diokno was highlighting earlier about chronology. The first two bullet points from a certain textbook seems to mix up the events. The Kawit Declaration should have been discussed first before the Republika ng Malolos, and the Sherman and the Taft Commission should have been discussed first before the return of Aguinaldo to the Philippines in the Battle of Manila Bay. So there's a confusion when the students read the narrative in that specific textbook when it comes to chronology. In the last bullet point of this slide, it seems that the authors would like to tell the readers that Osmeña and Quezon were elected as Speaker of the House and Senate President respectively in 1907, where it is not, because Quezon would only be elected as Senate President in 1916 after the Senate would be established by virtue of the Jones Law. So there's an error there. Next slide. Some glaring unfounded statements in the textbooks, our team can be seen in the following slides. For example, in the second bullet point, it's very difficult to ascertain or verify that Rizal and Bonifacio actually met in person, or that became close friends for that matter. The authors of this textbook make a dubious claim. The statement has striking similarities with the scenes from the 2014 movie Bonifacio ang Unang Pangulo, where the specific scenes in the next slide please, depict Bonifacio's encounter with Rizal in his cell at Fort Bonifacio. Again, these are dubious claims that need to be verified and ascertained, and why are they in the textbooks? Next slide. The first bullet point of these textbooks, an acronym is used to refer to the 8 provinces that joined the revolution. But it seems to be that this acronym is a creation of the authors only, because there is no factual basis for this acronym, or there's no official recognition that acronyms are used to refer to the 8 provinces. It's very strange. Next slide, please.
Oops. What
So
happened?
there are many, while Ma'am is finding the slide. So there are many factual errors, as you can see in those examples that we've highlighted. And after we reviewed the textbooks, we thought that this really needs the attention of the educational community, because we're problematizing revisionism in history, and we can't even get the basic facts straight inside in our textbooks. Okay.
Sorry, I'm trying to find.
I can present my slides, ma'am. I have opened my naman.
Yeah, maybe you should.
Okay.
Something happened. Sorry, Gio.
I'll just share my screen.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know
Here.
what happened.
Okay.
Thank you.
I just click play. Okay, where are we?
After that pa. Skip na.
Here.
Yeah.
Here. Okay.
Yan. Thank you.
So, mismatched photos on this particular slide. For mismatched photos, there are some good examples that our team found. For the first photo, the small one on the upper left-hand corner of the slide, the authors labeled the images as the one with the spear on the left side, Mandirigma, and on the right, the couple, Timawa. But the Boxer Codex, from where these photos were taken, actually say that the Mandirigma, as the authors claim, is actually a Javanese soldier. It's not even native Filipino. No? The authors should have simply labeled the couple on the right, mga taga-Visayas, instead of referring to them as Timawa, because the Boxer Codex simply labeled the image of the couple as Visayas. Okay. For this slide, in another textbook which cites or uses the image or gets the diagram from the Boxer Codex, they refer to the couple here on the upper right-hand corner, the diagram, mag-asawang Maginoo. But this image is simply labeled in the Boxer Codex as, again, Visayas. They're not even Maginoo Tagalogs. They are Bisayas according to the Boxer Codex. The image on the right was described, the one with the sword. The authors described them as Timawa, but they are actually Brunei, from Borneo or from Brunei, according to the Boxer Codex. So again, not even native Filipinos, but they are labeled as such in the textbooks. The authors, if they really wanted to show images of Maginoo Tagalogs, they should have used these appropriate images from the Boxer Codex, which are labeled as Naturales or Tagalogs. So it's not very difficult to find the appropriate labels in the Boxer Codex to assign or ascribe the correct caption for that. Okay. Another striking example of mismatched photo is in this fourth example, the one in the middle. The person in the photo is actually Douglas MacArthur and not Arthur MacArthur as the caption indicates. So wrong historical information ascribed to a photo. In this last slide, students are asked to do an activity based on maps that do not even help them answer the question about the national territory of the Philippines. Other maps should have been used for this purpose. Maps that to begin with are not pixelated and have the appropriate labels on them to help the students actually answer questions on national territory. So I think this is the last slide for this part of the presentation. These are only examples of historical inaccuracies that our team selected for the purpose of this presentation. There are other examples which we have discovered across all textbooks which we reviewed. And these textbooks clearly need to be revised, revisited, and corrected for the purpose of future education. At this point in hand, I hand over the virtual floor to my colleague Aaron Biernes, who will discuss the next part of the presentation, which is on civic goals that we found in several textbooks. Thank you, Aaron.
All right. Thank you, Professor Giyang. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Aaron Viernes, and I will be discussing another component of our review of selected grades 5 and grade 6 textbooks. Previously, Professor Giyang presented our key observations on the major inaccuracies. This time, I will deal with the subject of civic-mindedness and how they were expressed or presented in the textbooks we've reviewed. Now, why is this an important component of the textbook review? This is precisely because civic goals were clearly stipulated as a cornerstone of DepEd's Araling Panlipunan curriculum. Broadly speaking, DepEd aims to instill civic-mindedness in order to develop students with clear identity and role as Filipinos. In the review of the textbooks, we found that civic-mindedness is expressed as civic traits, civic duties, civic rights, and civic engagement. What does this mean? With these expressions of civic-mindedness, the idea is to aid students to understand processes of government, for example, or another example would be the appreciation of history and heritage, or even civic participation. Generally, these expressions of civic-mindedness are presented as prescriptions and or activities in the textbooks. In the following slides, we will present examples of these. Now, for the prescriptions in the textbooks are very clear, specifically in stating desired conduct and traits expected of a Filipino citizen. Often, they are discussed in different contexts that deal with cultural and national pride, environmental consciousness, gender equality, national consciousness, and civic rights. In some grade 5 textbooks, for example, they are very clear with their prescription and usually starts their statements with dapat, as we can see in the examples in these slides. For example, in one textbook, it states that dapat lamang ipagpatuloy ang pag-unlad at paglinang ng katayuan ng kababaihan. Now, in another statement, it mentions dapat makita sa ating mga gawi at gawain ang ganda at yaman ng ating kultura. There are also statements that enumerates rights and duties of citizens. Under the topic, mga epekto ng unang pag-aalsa. One textbook highlighted the right to organize. In another topic, kahalagahan ng pagganap sa sariling tungkulin sa pagsulong ng kamalayang pambansa, a list of civic duties such as mabuting pakikipag-ugnayan sa kapwa-tao, mabuting saloobin sa paggawa, pagtangkilik sa sariling produkto, paggamit ng wasto ng likas na yaman, among many others, were also presented. Now, similar observations can also be made in the prescriptions in grade 6 textbooks. In one example, a textbook discussed both the obligation of the state and its citizens in protecting the country's sovereignty and territory. So for example, in the first item we can see here in this slide, it states, ang katatagan, katahimikan at katiwasayan ng bansa ang pangunahing alalahanin ng pamahalaan. But at the same time, it also states sa kabilang banda, ang mga mamamayan ay may katungkulang ipagtanggol ang kalayaan at soberanya ng kanilang bansa. Significant number of prescriptive statements on civic mindedness are on the topic regarding contemporary issues. The statements usually underscore the expected civic duties and traits from the citizens. One example tackled the subject of colonial mentality and placed significant attention in taking pride of one's local product and own language. In other examples, duties of citizens were highlighted. In one textbook, these duties were listed as katapatan sa Republika, paggalang sa bandila ng Pilipinas, pagtatanggol sa Estado. Other examples highlighted the civic duty to protect the country's environment and natural resources, and some underscored the importance of following the laws of the land. Now, what about the class activities? Most of activities in the textbooks that relate to civic-mindedness are found at the end of each lesson. In the different textbooks, these activities are labeled pagpapahalaga mula sa puso, may pagmamalasakit ako, pagninilay, pahalagaan natin, and isabuhay mo. Like the prescriptions, the end of chapter activities also dealt with topics such as active citizenship, environmental consciousness, and as well as civic rights and duties. The activities rely heavily on situational questions. Some of these questions attempts to elucidate an opinion from the student regarding a particular situation, while others ask for more direct and concrete responses. Now, we can see both instances, for example, in two separate activities we can see here in the slides. One activity asks students to craft a guideline that would help prevent the dangers of heavy rainfall, while the other asks the students' opinion on how their actions contribute to climate change. In other topics, such as pinagmulan ng Pilipino and sinaunang lipunan, we may see that activities relating to civic-mindedness focus about national pride. Words such as mapapahalagahan and maipagmamalaki may often be encountered here, as we can see in some of the examples in this slide. So for example, paano mo mapapahalagahan at maipagmamalaki ang pinagmulan ng mga Pilipino? Or in another example, paano mapapahalagan ang kalikasan at masusolusyonan ang suliraning pagkasira nito? Another activity engages students to express what they feel about a certain topic, as seen in the last example. There are more kinds of situational questions found in grade 5 textbooks. Under the topic Reduksyon at Kristyanisasyon in Fajardo et al., the authors provided the students with very specific kind of situation, which is also very interesting. What is the situation? Kung ang iyong pamilya ay ililipat ng tirahan ng pamahalaan dahil sa isang mahalagang proyekto para sa kapakanan ng nakararami, ano ang iyong magiging saloobin? Paano mo ipaparating ang iyong saloobin sa kinauukulan? Significantly, the way the question was crafted allows a discussion on individual rights vis-a-vis the concept of common good. Another activity touched on civic engagement by asking students what they would do in case a public official or public officials abuse their possessions. In the topic pag-usbong ng kamalayang pambansa, we may see that the activities across the textbooks deal with the topics of national consciousness, independence, and freedom of speech as seen in different examples shown here in this slide. Now, in the grade 6 textbooks, there are activities that specifically deals with territorial issues, most especially the Chinese threat to the Philippine sovereignty in the West Philippine Sea. One activity even asked students to craft a post or a template of a post that they would post in Facebook that would actually strengthen the Philippine claims in the area. Activities under kilusang propaganda, on the other hand, underscore the significance of active citizenship in addressing social problems, while activities under the Katipunan dealt with the right to organize, which can also be seen in the succeeding slide. Okay. Here, for example, we can see another instance of a situational question. However, unlike the previous one presented in this presentation, a set of choices was actually provided for the students. So we can actually see it here. Now, unfortunately, our team was not able to gain access to the teacher's guide for this specific textbooks of Batang and Pamaran. So we are unsure if they were actually able to provide an answer for these kinds of activities. Okay. Now, the activity under the topic Batas Militar dealt with questions on civic engagement. For example, it asked specific questions such as, paano mo mapapahalagan ang pagtuligsa ng mga mamamayang Pilipino sa mga katiwaliang nagaganap sa pamahalaan? Or another question, dapat bang purihin ang kabataang sumali sa mga kilos protesta para sa pagbabago ng lipunan? Ipaliwanag ang iyong sagot. Now, in these last examples, we can see similar themes that have been presented earlier. An activity right after the topic on EDSA People Power Revolution tells students ipamalas ang iyong pagpapahalaga sa iyong kalayaan at karapatang pantao. Likewise, in the last example, the activity emphasized on the significance of active citizenship in promoting democracy. So what did we find out? Okay. Now, in summary, first, civic-mindedness is often presented in textbooks with greater appeal to emotion than to civic knowledge. Thus, students would often encounter prescriptions or activities that are often only limited to mere listing of duties and rights of citizens rather than discussions that actually enriches their civic education. For example, some activities would only ask students maglista ng talaan tungkol sa mga lugar o bagay, kaugalian na maipapagmalaki mo bilang isang Pilipino. Or in some activities, they only ask students to write a poem or a letter on how they feel about a specific incident in history. Second, amongst the textbooks that we've reviewed, there is a tendency to prescribe or impose which sometimes inhibit productive class discussions. We can actually see it more with the grade 6 textbooks rather than with the grade 5 textbooks. In other cases, particularly in the activities, the students' responses are often treated as opinions. So for example, in one of the textbooks or the teacher's manual we've encountered, it actually states, hayaan ang mga mag-aaral na ibigay ang kanilang opinion. Third, there are even instances that discussions and exercises relating to civic-mindedness are not relatable or relevant, or even sometimes challenging for the students. So for example, there is a specific activity that asks students to imagine themselves as a judge in the Court of Arbitration in the Netherlands. This is quite problematic because the textbook was not actually able to discuss properly what are the functions of the court itself and even the functions of the judge. Okay? And the fourth one, it is also almost impossible to measure the efficacy of prescriptions, how effective they are. And more so, their impact to the student's civic education. Gaano kalalim yung impact niya dun sa pag-aaral ng isang estudyante. And significantly, when we look into the specific activities we've presented earlier, it actually requires teachers' intervention to properly guide students in their understanding of civic knowledge. Lastly, unlike in the United States, no, here in the Philippines, there is yet to be an available data on Filipino student civic mindedness, which we think is particularly significant, most especially if you want to guide future improvements or reforms in the civic mindedness component of the DepEd curriculum. So that would be all for this part. I'm turning the floor over to Professor Alvarez and Professor Ramos for their presentation of the discussion of martial law in the grade 6 textbooks. Thank you.
Maraming salamat, Aaron. So allow me to share our slides first. Okay, so let's talk about how martial law was discussed in various textbooks. Okay, so on this part, titingnan natin again paano tinatalakay ang batas militar bilang isang paksa sa mga textbook. Ano yung pagsusuri? Okay, ano yung pagsusuring isinagawa namin sa nilalaman ng mga discussions on martial law. At ano yung sa tingin namin yung paraan paano mas mapapahusay yung pagtalakay hinggil sa isang relatively contentious part ng ating kasaysayan, lalo na sa kasalukuyan. Okay? So, sa isang maikling survey ng nilalaman ng mga textbooks, makikita natin sa 7 textbook na aming sinuri, nag-average sa 7 to 11% ang talakayan tungkol sa martial law at people power revolution. Okay? At kadalasan ay nabubuod ito sa dalawang lessons. Okay? So, 2 lessons na bahagi ng ika-4 na unit, 4th unit ng mga textbook. So 6.9% of the textbook, 7.1, 7.3, 9.5, 10.2, etc. At dalawang lesson bawat textbook. So mainam na bigang emphasis na okay, sa mga pagtalakay sa mga textbooks ito nakatuon sa una, okay, description or discussion about the situation of the country under martial rule. And second, another lesson, focus on the resistance struggle for democracy, okay, all leading to the people power revolution. Okay, so yun yung isang overview nung nilalaman ng mga textbooks hinggil sa batas militar. Okay, so napansin namin na given overall the narrative of Filipino struggle for freedom under martial rule, which is 14 years, occupies very limited space in textbook. For example, in the DepEd textbook, Reform Movement, the Philippine Revolution, and the Philippine-American War are taken up in 5 lessons, occupying almost 20% of the textbook, or double the space given to the discussion of martial law. Okay. Tinignan din namin ano yung mga common, okay, na mga tema, okay, o mga tinatalakay doon sa mga lessons on martial law and people power revolution. At makikita natin na kadalasan dito mayroong pagtalakay or discussion on the reasons on the imposition of martial law, the 1973 Constitution, mga programa na pinatupad sa ilalim ng batas militar, yung paglilift o pag-aalis, okay, quote-unquote, ng batas militar, okay, paglaban, resistance to martial law, martial rule, okay, plunder of national coffers, and the factors that gave rise to the people power revolution. So, tingnan natin yung ilan sa mga discussion sa mga textbooks sa ito. So, makita dito sa listahan ang ilan sa mga na-point out namin na madalas na binabanggit ng mga textbook authors na dahilan bakit ipinatupad o dineklara ang batas militar. Okay, so makikita natin sa 7 textbooks, okay, binabanggit na ang lumalalang protesta laban sa pagtaas ng presyo ng langis sa pandaigdig ng merkado, okay, okay, ang problema sa Mindanao, okay, secession of Mindanao, okay, the Plaza Miranda bombing, okay, the ambush of then Defense Secretary Juan Ponce Enrile, rampant criminality and drug use. Kadalasan ito yung mga binabanggit ng mga textbooks kung bakit dineklara ang batas militar. Ngunit, okay, kakaunti yung nag-point out ng isang obvious na factor. Yun yung ambisyon dating Pangulong Marcos na manatili sa kapangyarihan. Okay, so sa mga textbooks, okay, the most commonly cited, communist threat, okay, the protest, the student protests, for example, okay, the situation in Mindanao, okay, echo Marcos's justification of martial law, okay, but and his desire to stay in power, okay, mentioned by two textbooks, but as viewpoint of some historians, not the textbook writers, okay, and some textbooks embraced, okay, the justification of martial law as saving the republic and reforming the society, and some textbooks even justified that yes, the republic was saved because look at it, we have a lot of infrastructural projects, naramdaman ang development sa larangan ng infrastruktura at iba pa. Okay. Ngunit, kaya nabanggit natin kanina, hindi nabibigyan pansin ng isang obvious na factor, yung pagnanais na manatili sa kapangyarihan. And historically, if we're going to look at the timeline of Marcos's ambition as early as May of 1969, ay lumilitaw na ito, okay, sa kanyang mga talumpati. For example, on May 17, 1969, in a speech before the PMA, Philippine Military Academy Alumni Association, FM hinted, okay, his desire to declare martial law. In December of 1969, Marcos instructed then Defense Secretary Juan Ponce Enrile to study the powers conferred by the 1935 Constitution on the President as Commander-in-Chief. He also instructed then Executive Secretary Alejandro Melchor and Brigadier General Jose Almonte to study how martial law was implemented in different countries. Okay? And in January of 1970, Enrile, then DND Undersecretary Efren Plana, and Minerva Gonzaga submitted to Marcos the only copy of a confidential report on the legal nature and extent of martial law. 1 week later, Marcos instructed Enrile to prepare the documents needed to implement martial law. So may malinaw na plano, okay, hinggil sa pagpapanatili sa kapangyarihan at sa weaponization, okay, ng martial law, okay, na nasa 1935, nasa existing constitution at that time, bilang instrumento upang manatili sa kapangyarihan. At kung titingnan natin ang timeline ng makaganapan mula Mayo hanggang Setyembre of 1972, malinaw. May malinaw ang pagpapatupad ng nabuong plano hinggil sa paano mananatili sa kapangyarihan. So May 8, okay, Marcos met Enrile and his trusted commanders to discuss the martial plan and the list of persons to arrest. Okay? On August 1, okay, Marcos met what we infamously call as the Rolex 12 or the Omega Band. Okay, the people who received, quote unquote, okay, Rolex watches or Omega watches bilang bahagi ng kanilang trabaho or task na ipatupad ang batas militar. Okay, on September 7. Okay, so September 13, okay, sunod-sunod ang mga kaganapan. On September 7, okay, Marcos worked on papers needed to declare martial law, which he and Enrile finalized. Okay, on that month, on September 13, Ninoy Aquino made a privileged speech exposing what we call now as Oplan Sagittarius. Okay, on September 17, U.S. Embassy in Manila is already aware of Marcos' plan of declaring martial law. Okay. September 21, Marcos finalized the proclamation. September 22, nangyari yung ambush, okay, kay Juan Ponce Enrile. September 23, Francisco Tatad appeared, okay, on national TV, and later on, Marcos announced that the country has been placed under martial law. So malinaw, okay, planado ang pamamaraan ng paggamit sa batas militar upang manatili sa kapangyarihan. Okay. Isang rin sa mga tinignan naming discussion sa mga textbooks ay paano tinatalakay yung crucial na kaganapan ng ambush kay Juan Ponce Enrile. So some textbooks did not mention the event, some textbooks mentioned but did not examine the veracity of the story, and some textbooks mention na fake ito, kaduda-dudan. Okay, two textbooks. Okay, and if we're going to look at the primary sources, for example, Marcos's diary, okay, may malinaw na paggamit doon sa event bilang isa sa mga tagapag-trigger ng event. As you can see in this entry sa diary ni Marcos, the Enrile ambush, this makes the martial law proclamation a necessity. Wala mismo sa diary ni Marcos, September 22, 1972. At itong issue na ito ay 2 beses ni-retract ni Enrile. So, una niyang ni-retract sa press conference ng Ministry of National Defense noong February 22, 1986. Then, he retracted na, totoo yun, okay, sa kanyang memoir published in 2012. Tinignan din namin kung paano tinatalakay ang 1973 Constitution sa mga textbooks. Okay, so tingnan natin kung paano tinatalakay yung content. Okay, content ng 1973 Constitution. So, may grupo sa 4 ang mga nabanggit na discussion. Some mentioned it briefly, some explained it briefly, mayroong maayos or ekstensibong pagtalakay at may isa na hindi binanggit at all. Halimbawa, sa isang textbook, okay, so makikita natin ang discussion na ito tungkol sa nature or tungkol sa nilalaman ng Saligang Batas ng 1973 at kung bakit mahalaga ito bilang isang politikal na kaganapan noong panahon yun. Okay, so ito rin, discussion, the 1973 Constitution was briefly explained, ngunit makikita natin na restatement lang ito ng several constitutional provisions at walang critical na examination kung ano nga ba ito. Okay. Tinignan din namin ng team ang discussion sa kung paano ni-ratify yung 1973 Constitution. Okay. 5 textbooks did not mention the issues surrounding the ratification of that particular constitution. 1 had a brief mention and 1 a good analysis. Okay, so for example, yan, makikita natin dito yung isang brief explanation, just a reference. Pinadala ni Marcos sa konstitusyon sa taong bayan, inaprubahan, may nagreklamo, dinala sa Korte Suprema. Okay, ngunit yung isa nating makikitang maayos analysis, paano yung naging contact ng ratification ng Constitution. So, yung problematikong Citizens Assembly, for example, na nagtaasan na ng kamay, okay, at doon lumalabas ang mga tanong na sino ang nais ng bigas sa halip na sino ang sumasang-ayon sa Constitution. Okay. Kung titingnan ang mga programa na ipinatupad sa ilalim ng batas militar na tinatalakay sa mga textbook, makikita natin na may nearly exclusive focus on the programs of the new society, the pledges. Okay, so 1 textbook made a positive assessment of the program na wala yung mga pang-abuso, na wala yung mga tiwali, nagkaroon ng peace and order dahil sa curfew at nawala yung mga kriminal, binuhay ang pagiging makabayan ng mga tao sa pamamagitan ng slogan isang bansa, isang diwa, sinanay ang mga Pilipino na maging masunurin at disiplinado. Ngunit may mga textbook na critical yung pagtalakay, may pagkilala dun sa challenges and shortcomings ng mga programang ito. Okay, so at may yung textbook na hinighlight yung deleterious effects ng mga programa ng batas militar at ng bagong lipunan, imprisonment of critics, takeover of media and broadcasting companies, and state-sanctioned human rights. Bakit mahalagang bigyang emphasis ito? Kasi dito kadalasan nagmumula yung problema o yung napapansin nating nostalgia ngayon ng Great Society noong panahon ng batas militar dahil walang critical na pagsuri doon sa mga programa. Pawang paglilista, description ng iba't ibang mga bagay. So isang halimbawa, okay, sa isang Senate hearing noong May 2020, okay, binanggit na Senator Amy Marcos na during the 70s, okay, during the Masagana 99 in the 1970s, there was a very effective use of commercial banks, rural banks, and even cooperative banks, okay, sa pagpapaunlad ng agrikultura. However, perhaps we could consider enlarging the national government stake even in that regard. Finance Secretary Dominguez answered, okay, sabi niya, ma'am, before we go ahead regarding the Masagana 99, I was Secretary of Agriculture that cleaned up the mess of Masagana 99 that was left with Masagana 99. There were about 800 banks that were bankrupted by the program. We had to rescue them. Okay, it was if it was a total success or not, it has to be measured against that. And Marcos replied, the success perhaps was not in banking, it was in exportation. And Dominguez said, No, we never exported rice. So yung ganitong critical na pagsusuri hinggil sa mga programa ay mahalagang mailagay sa mga textbook. Nasa gayon makikita natin na hindi lamang mga programa o paglilista ng mga programa dahil merong implikasyon na okay, sa dami ng programa ay okay, maayos ang lipunan. So kailangan magkaroon ng critical na examination ng mga bagay na ito. So kung patuloy ang aming discussion on the martial law in the textbooks, okay, I call my colleague Don D. Ramos to continue.
Thank you, Dr. Alvarez. Let me continue with our presentation on different topics related to martial law. Next slide. With regards to the nature of martial law, we found out that there is a consensus among textbooks that martial law is authoritarian in nature. However, we also said that more evidence would be helpful in discussing the nature of martial law. For example, there's one textbook that explains the deleterious effects of martial law as seen on the slide. Kalamitang kaakibat ng batas militar ang pagsuspindi ng batas sibil, karapatang sibil at writ of habeas corpus, pagsasailalim o pagpapalawig ng hukumang militar at paglalagay ng curfew. However, we also found out that this passage was directly lifted from Wikipedia and then translated to Filipino without proper attribution. We juxtaposed the two passages. The original entry can be seen on the slide also. Next slide, please. We also provided examples of statements that could be strengthened by presenting evidences. For example, ang siyam na taong pag-iral ng batas militar mula 1972 hanggang 1981 sa Pilipinas ay nakaapekto ng lubos sa kalagayang pampulitika, pangkabuhayan at panlipunan ng mga Pilipino. Diokno et al. We can agree on this statement and the author correctly stated the statement. However, we have to provide or demonstrate this with substantial evidence. The point that we are making here is we can agree on these statements, but we need to demonstrate them with evidences. Whether a statement is for or against martial law, evidence is needed to back up these claims or statements. So that is one of the weaknesses that we found in these textbooks. Next slide. Another way of examining the textbooks is by looking at the quality of explanation. In terms of the quote lifting of martial law, we classified the quality of explanation from poor to best. The poor explanation lacks critical information on the lifting of martial law. For example, we classified Bourbon et al. As poor. And Bourbon et al. States that nang pawalang bisa ang batas militar, unang ginawa ng pangasiwaang Marcos ang pagbabago sa paraan ng pamamahala. The statement highlighted the change in government, but it ignored the fact that even after the quote lifting of martial law, Marcos and the executive remained powerful and that the writ of habeas corpus is still suspended in some areas of the Philippines. On the other hand, we consider the explanations of Batang and Pamaran and Alcala and Oxales as the best in explaining the lifting of martial law because they take a critical approach and they highlighted that even after the lifting of martial law through Proclamation 2045, Marcos remained powerful and the suspension of writ of habeas corpus remained in some parts of the country. Let me read, for example, Alcala and Oxales. Enero 17, 1981, nang inanunsyo ni Pangulong Marcos ang pagtatapos ng batas militar sa bisa ng Proclamation 2045. Ngunit, sa kabila ng pagtatapos nito, nanatili ang lahat ng presidential decree, ang legislative power at ang suspension ng writ of habeas corpus na hindi makikita doon sa paliwanag kanina ni Barcelon. On the other hand, Torres et al.'s discussion is considered fair, while the three remaining textbooks, Diokno et al., Quizol et al., they provide good explanation on the martial law. Next slide, please. Another common topic among textbooks is the popular opposition to martial law. In the main or generally, the textbooks focused on known individuals. For example, they tend to focus on mga lider kabataan, alagad ng sining, at mga kilalang tao, rather than on popular social movements or groups of people such as Justice for Aquino, Justice for All, or what we commonly call as JADJA, Coalition of Organizations for the Restoration of Democracy or CORD, National Alliance for Justice, Freedom, and Democracy, and Bagong Alyansang Makabayan or Bayan. On the other hand, generally the textbooks, they view the assassination of Ninoy as the trigger or the main trigger that awakened the public consciousness, and that resulted in the mobilization of people. There are also some or slight references to other opposition and armed movements such as CPP and PA and the Muslim resistance, including the Moro National Liberation Front. Next slide, please. In terms of the topic plunders of national coffers, the topic Marcos plunder is missing in 6 out of 7 textbooks. It is not taken up. However, there are some discussion on the plunders of Marcos's cronies, not the Marcos family's plunder, but of the cronies. Now, out of the 7 textbooks, only that of Quizol et al. Discusses Marcos's plunder. However, it is tentatively put as, quote, naging usap-usapan din ang marangyang pamuhay ng pamilya, kamag-anakan at mga malalapit na kaibigan ni Marcos, kaya't pinaniniwalaan. So here we can see the authors are using hedges. And again, they could have provided evidences or data to strengthen this particular discussion. Even in chapters on post-EDSA governments, Marcos plunder is barely touched except in Diokno et al. It was mentioned briefly in connection with the establishment of the PCGG. Next slide, please. Now, generally, the textbooks viewed the EDSA revolution as a positive development in terms of the factors that gave rise to the people power revolution. It was seen as a positive development, an end to the authoritarian rule, and a new path to change. However, there are also weaknesses in the discussion in their discussion of the causes that gave rise to the people power revolution. First, the textbooks tend to conflate the timeline of events leading to the people power revolution, such as, for example, the walkout of the COMELEC staff, the breakaway of Enrile and Ramos, and the call of Cardinal Sin, with causes or factors that gave rise to it. So parang napaghahalo. The second one is that there are some factors cited in the discussion that are inconsequential. Like, for example, the impeachment attempt in the National Assembly in 1985. Now, what are the factors that gave rise or that led to the 1986 revolution? In terms of the factors, as an example, we adopted the framework or the causes cited by Quizol et al. And we looked at other textbooks. We compared them. There are 3 factors that are cited by Quizol et al. The first one is pagpaslang kay Ninoy. Pangalawa is krisis sa ekonomiya. And the third one is snap election of 1896. Generally, Ninoy's assassination appears in all textbooks, and it is generally considered as the main factor that led to the awakening of public consciousness. However, 2 out of 7 textbooks did not discuss the economic crisis. So 5 out of 7 discussed the economic crisis. And they cited the following reasons as the causes of the said economic crisis. The assassination of Ninoy, the global oil price hike, and the low agricultural output, and rampant corruption as main triggers of that economic crisis. Meanwhile, all 7 textbooks agree that the snap election of 1986 was fraudulent and it has significant impact. Meaning to say, the events in the snap election heightened the protest, the street protest. Next slide, please. All in all, we we came up with 4 recommendations on how to improve the discussion on martial law. The first one is to present evidence to support our interpretations and conclusions. Paulit-ulit na nabanggit kanina, karamihan ay hindi nagpapakita ng economic data para suportahan yung kanilang interpretation on the martial law programs, for example, on the economic crisis, etc. Number 2, to lift silences in the textbooks and to beef up underdeveloped sections. Lift silences, marami yung mga topics na hindi nabanggit. Halimbawa, yung Marcos plunder, hindi siya masyado na-discuss, even the 1973 Constitution. Number 3, to provide timelines to help students understand how events unfolded. And number 4, use the many easily available primary sources about martial law, which of course dapat ay developmentally accurate or appropriate. So yun lamang po para sa bahaging ito. And now I turn over the virtual floor to Dr. Maria Serena Diokno for some concluding remarks.
Okay. Salamat, Dondi. Thank you. At salamat. I don't know if I mentioned earlier that Kirby, Gio, Dondi, and Aaron are all my colleagues sa UP Department of History. So just a quick final note, because we've taken up so much of your time, let me try and put these all together. So basically, if you're looking at the textbook treatment of martial law, the first 2 we sort of alluded to earlier, the textbook is objective, or at least it's fair, it presents both sides. Of course, our concern is we know that they interpret facts and some distance actually set themselves apart from certain possibly sensitive positions. The textbook details the most significant aspects of martial law. In fact, we uncovered silences in the textbook, no mention of Marcos plunder, ratification of 1973 Constitution. In these instances, silence speaks louder than the words. It's the third one that is something that we want to raise before you. And this appears in the textbook, that the study of martial law is a matter of opinion or even feeling, which all are entitled to. And because everyone has a right to an opinion, then we can disagree with each other, of course, respectfully, but we can disagree. And this is where I think a serious problem lies in the treatment of martial law. Because if we agree that the study of martial law is simply a matter of opinion, then what's the place of facts? In fact, we do find that there's no economic data at all in the textbooks for assertions that are made of progress or even of decline. And when there is an assertion that, well, it's just your opinion, we can disagree with one another, I think the question here is not only to distinguish between fact and opinion. That's always what teachers are told to teach students. But how do we evaluate an opinion? How do we evaluate a conclusion, an interpretation? That is an entirely different skill from distinguishing between fact and opinion. And given the massive misinformation and fake news going around, it is absolutely necessary that we teach our students how to evaluate an opinion. So this is just an example of an interpretation sa textbook. Pag sabihin ng textbook author, naging mabunga, gumanda, mas maganda, these are interpretations, they're conclusions, presumably derived from facts. But textbook writers make them. That's our point. They're not just all facts. There are many interpretations in the textbook. So if you take a look at yung mga salik sa pagdeklara ng batas militar, this is just an example. So paglubha ng CPP-NPA threat, okay, this is from the DepEd textbook by Quisol. So ayon kay Marcos, yung lumaki ang bilang ng mga NPA. Then pagbomba sa Plaza Miranda, na pinaghinalaang dito ay si Marcos naman itinuro niyang CPP-NPA. Yung attempted assassination of Enrile, isang pangunahing dahilan na pinagdudahan naman ng marami. Okay, pag nanais ni Marcos na manatili sa posisyon, this is the interesting part that Kirby mentioned earlier. When you look at the earlier example about paglubha ng banta ng CPP-NPA, malinaw, ayon kay Marcos, pinahayag din ni Marcos ang sinasabing pagsasagawa ng rebellion. When they talk about pagnanais ni Marcos na manatili sa posisyon, what does the textbook author say? Sa kabila ng mga dahilang tinukoy ni Marcos ito, okay, may paniwala ang ilang historiador. So this kind of distancing, and I point out to you, it's a kind of hedging that textbook authors do. Maybe they want to appear, I don't know, objective. Maybe they want to appear neutral. All right? Other examples of hedging. Ayon sa masusing mga pagsusuri ng mga historiador, dineklara ni Marcos dahil gusto niyang manatili sa posisyon. Itinuturing ang panahong ito, martial law, bilang pinakamadilim, sinasabing namatay ang demokrasya. Naging usap-usapan din ng marangyang pamumuhay, no, ng pamilyang Marcos. Pinaniniwala ang nagnakaw. So, opinion, belief, to be, lumaganap ang katiwalian sa pamahalaan, okay, at pinaniniwala ang nilustay ang kaban ng bayan. So these are tentative statements. That's why I want to introduce the term both sidesism. It's a term that originally started with media when, in an attempt to maybe appear objective or neutral, media tries to find a second story or second angle to a story, even if the credibility of that other angle is highly questionable or it has no credibility at all. And this term, both sidesism, became popular under President Trump in the US because he wanted to avoid condemning an obviously condemnable action such as the neo-Nazi rally in Charlottesville last year. And what does he say? Well, there were good people on both sides. Okay? And now we find it in education as well, which is an attempt to be objective or balanced. You want to present both sides, but the desire is based on the wrong assumption that both sides are always equally valid. So ito ang mga halimbawa sa mga textbooks, no, na ang examples of both sides. Ito yung mga exercises na pinagagawa sa mga estudyante sa 4 na textbook. Meron din sa iba, pinili ko lang itong 4. So isa, parehong term, no? Gumawa ng dula-dulaan ng estudyante tungkol sa mabuting epekto at hindi mabuting epekto. Yung isa naman, tukuyin kung ito ay nakabuti o hindi nakabuti. Yung isa naman, bida o kontrabida tungkol kay Pangulong Marcos, may column na mabuti, may column din na hindi mabuti. And then in another, it's about yung positibo at negatibong aspeto ng batas militar. So there's an attempt to look at both sides. And is there anything wrong with looking at both sides? No. But what we are saying is that when you say mabuti or hindi mabuti, this cannot be simply a matter of opinion. There have to be clear parameters and there has to be credible evidence on which a statement is made. My concern is that nasana yung mga kabataan sa mga like, share, don't like sa Facebook. Baka akala din nila itong like mabuti, dislike hindi mabuti. There have to be parameters that are cleared and understandable to the entire class, to those engaged in the discussion. Okay, this is not just a matter of, well, bida siya o kontrabida siya. So there must be clear and credible bias. So what are the effects of both sidesism? Well, one is that there's a false moral equivalence. Well, they're both okay lang naman, opinion yan. So the problem is that tolerates all views and it doesn't dismiss any, even views that are, of course, objectionable. Well, opinion niya yan so it's tolerable. Moral relativism, you avoid pointing out any wrongdoing, exactly like what Trump did last year in August. So you avoid taking a position. And in effect, when you avoid taking one and you are in a position of power, as Trump was, then you actually end up supporting the condemnable side. Another dangerous effect could be skepticism, the view that, well, both sides are biased anyway, well, possibly true, and therefore unreliable, and that's false. So some might say, there's no such truth anyway. I mean, we hear that even with elections. Lahat naman sila corrupt. So what's the difference? You remember in 2019, nung may isang kandidato na nanalo sa Senado na sinungaling tungkol sa degree niya sa UP. Anong sinabi ng isang kandidato ngayon sa Vice President? Lahat naman ng kandidato nagsisinungaling. That kind of skepticism is not good. So maybe what we want to also point out is that both sidesism is itself a bias because both sides are not always equally valid. And if you look at the AP curriculum, makikita naman doon that certain values are always valid, meaning they're not negotiable. Values like human dignity, freedom. I mean, the whole history of struggle for freedom, rights, being a person, being equal as a human being. These are not negotiable. No, you cannot say one side is not valid or more less is invalid because of that. When you're talking about these kinds of values, and they are expressed in the civic goals of the Araling Panlipunan curriculum, then these are not negotiable sides. So how do we see the treatment of martial law as a matter of opinion or sentiment? Well, two ways, no? That the students are either asked to survey or mag-interview, and these are two examples there. Yung una, mag-interview ng 10 tao, dito sa pangalawa, 10 hanggang 15 tao na nakaranas ng buhay sa panahon ng batas militar. Okay? That's one way. Here's another, mag-interview ng 5 tao, but this exercise is a little bit odd because it's more concerned about the manner of the interview, yung paggamit ng multimedia device tulad ng camcorder. Mas mahalaga yon. Pati yung rubric na mag-evaluate ng kalidad ng panayam, ang concern lang niya kung nakuha yung correct number ng interviewees, kung angkop, etc. No evaluation at all of the content of the information obtained from the interview. The other way they solicit, the textbook solicit opinion is through the personal views as expressed, in this case, performatively. In the one on the left, tatayong estudyante, kung like, kung like niya, nakaupo siya. Kung hindi niya like, pues siya ay tatayo. At ano yung kanyang anong pinala-like o dislike? Well, yung curfew, yung pagkulong sa mga tao, nepotismo, okay, pagbuwag sa sangay tagapagbatas, and so on. On the right side, at least, well, ito, like or smiley or not, no? Like or not like, pagbalik ni Senator Aquino, okay, snap election, and so on. Well, at least on the right, the student is asked to explain yung kanyang damdamin. You see, paliwanag ang iyong damdamin sa loob ng 2 pangungusap. The one on the left, walang paliwanag. Tumayo ka lang or manatiling nakaupo. So walang resolution. Walang discussion, walang competence of analyzing perspectives and trying to determine alin ba dito ang may kredibilidad, ang kapanipaniwala, anong pinagbasehan ng ganitong pagtingin. So if you look at the earlier example, yung dula-dulaan ng mabuti at di mabuting epekto ng batas militar, tingnan natin ang rubric, boses, pagbigkas, kilos ng katawan, kalaman sa paksa. But, okay, this is probably the only 1 out of 5 that is relevance to the quality of the performance. Yung mensahe is not really mensahe, yung nilalaman. It's kung malinaw ang paraan ng kanyang paghatid ng mensahe and presentasyon. So, there are 5, 10, 15, 25 points, and even if you get perfect 5 in kaalaman sa paksa, you won't make any mark. Mas importante yung iyong boses at kilos ng iyong katawan. There are exercises aimed at what we historians would call historical empathy. I'm not certain that textbook writers are aware that historical empathy is a skill. It is not just a question of emotion, but there is a method for arriving it, and that there is a basis for arriving at such kind of empathy. It's grounded on one's understanding of context and what happened at that time. Anyway, the typical example would be, ano yung gagawin mo, ipalagay mo yung sarili mo sa pagkatao ni, let's say, ni Senator Ninoy Aquino, ni President, well, at that time, not yet President ni Cory Aquino, or estudyanteng sumali sa rally. Ito yung isang halimbawa, kung ikaw magharap nung panahon ng batas militar, ikaw ba'y sasali sa rally? And this is the answer in the teacher's manual. Well, hindi siya sumagot kung sasama o hindi. Basta papapangalagaan ko ang demokrasyang tinatama sa pamamagitan ng pagiging alerto. Okay, mapagmasid sa kaganapang nangyayari. That's it. there's a more advanced exercise that asks students to not only name 5 things they would do if they had witnessed the EDSA revolution, but also to cite their first priority and explain why. At least dyan may effort, no? Ipaliwanag kung bakit. So may basis for discussion. Hindi lang mananatili sa antas ng like or not like. Tingnan natin dito sa paglalahad ng opinion. These 2 exercises ask the students to write an essay. And again, tingnan natin ang mga pamantayan na ginagamit dun sa left, angkop sa paksa, maayos at organisado, and tama yung grammar. So what about the quality of the opinion, the basis, what evidence did they use to arrive at that opinion? That's not asked or measured at all. And similarly with the exercise on the right. So opinions are treated equally. That's my concern. It's your right, pare-pareho lang yan. And we all know that's not true. Okay? Some opinions, they deserve to be in the basurahan because they have no credit or credibility whatsoever. But the way this is taught in the textbook, well, the difference is it's not the opinion, it's how you present it. So these are our findings. Martial law discussion ranges from 7 to 11% of the textbook. We see many examples of both sidesism in an effort to be neutral. We have found examples of interpretations without evidence. And as who pointed this out earlier, one of the guys, it's not a question of you are for or against something. It's being able to present the basis of your interpretation or conclusion. That's a skill, and we would like to see more evidence. As I said earlier, no economic data about the period, and yet you see conclusions made about economic progress or crises. Many silences in the textbooks. Earlier we talked about silences in the earlier periods. Here, popular movements opposing martial law. Textbook writers tend to treat the study of martial law as a matter of opinion, but there are facts which seem to be in short supply in the textbooks, and critical thinking skills are not developed. So of course, you might want to ask, so should we do away with textbooks altogether? Well, I think if the Araling Panlipunan teacher is a historian, there really wouldn't be need for a textbook. Historians know what sources to use, primary and secondary, kung saan makukuha ito, how to use them. In general, the historian is not textbook dependent. Good historians anyway. But of course, in basic ed, karamihan ng Araling Panlipunan teachers natin ay hindi kumuha ng kasaysayan sa pre-service training sa kanilang undergrad. Very few. Because it's social studies, not really history. So doon sa pag-aaral na ginawa namin sa mga selected schools, the only history that they all took was GE history, which is GE. It's not for history majors. Let's not feel so bad. The same is true in US public high schools. At least this is the schools and staffing survey done more than a decade ago. I couldn't find them. I have to find a more recent one. But the same problem in most US public high schools. And I don't know why it's in history, not in the other subjects. I think there's a confusion because you have a term history and you have social studies. And when you study college, there's no real discipline that's called social studies. So you can have teachers of Araling Panlipunan who didn't take a single course in history except GE history. You know? So as we said, the textbook is as much for the teacher as it is for the student. And that's why I think we're stuck with textbooks. Kailangan ng teacher eh. Kung wala, ano yung gagamitin? This is the situation where we are at. So these are our recommendations. Of course, correct all those inaccuracies we pointed out. Fill in the gaps, all these silent topics. I think we should make room in the textbook and the classroom for debates and controversies. Okay, that's necessary. These are all learning opportunities. Many of the statements made and interpretations would do better if evidence were provided, even consideration of counter evidence. In good history, you anticipate counter evidence and you answer it so that you assure your reader that you are aware of the different angles to the story. Not necessarily both sides, but you're looking here at evidence that can favor or disfavor a certain position. We would like the space devoted to martial law doubled. I don't know why I keep losing my slide. What's my last one? Sorry. What's my last slide?
The recommendations.
Yes, but where is my slide? Anyway, I can end there. And if you have questions, we've taken up so much of your time. So I'll end there, and I'm sure it will come later. Thank you, everyone, and we would welcome your questions. Thank you. Jai, it's yours.
Thank you very much for an informative and critical presentation, Dr. Diokno, Professor Giang, Mr. Viernes, Dr. Alvarez, and Professor Ramos. I'm very sure our participants and attendees have some questions and comments by now. Some are even bringing up the conversation or the question of restoring Philippine history in high school. So we will be discussing those things in just a while. But before we proceed to our open forum, there are two things that the organizing committee would like us to address. The first one is I'd like to reiterate this gentle reminder for our participants and attendees. Kindly ensure your display name has your full name and your organization. Again, you may do so by going to your Zoom profile page, click edit beside your account name, and then put in your first and last name, and then click save changes. And second, may we request everyone to please turn on your cameras for a brief photo opportunity. Thank you. All right, so I'll be taking the picture simultaneously with the organizing committee. So please smile for the camera. 1, 2, 3. All right, can we have one more? All right, 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you very much. At this point, we now formally proceed to our open forum, which I think will be very exciting and engaging. As a matter of fact, there are now a few questions and comments in the Q&A and chat boxes. For those raising their hands, kindly input your questions in the Q&A function. Again, I'd like to encourage those who are raising their hands to input your questions in the Q&A function. We now open the virtual floor for questions and insights from our panelists and attendees. Feel free to enter your questions again in the Q&A box. Our speakers will be happy to take and answer your questions. We repeat, please type in your questions in the Q&A box. So if you haven't, please do so. And not in the chat boxes so that we can see which questions come in first. Baka po kasi makatabunan tayo ng mga messages na pumapasok sa chat box. Given the time we have today, we will entertain as many questions as we can on a first-come, first-served basis. So, ready na po ba ang ating mga panelists? All right.
Of course.
Okay, I think they're ready. So let me throw the very first question in the Q&A box. Has DepEd or the National Historical Commission recognized the factual errors in these textbooks? And if so, what actions have been done to address these errors?
You'd have to ask them.
Yeah.
You have to ask them. I don't know. What I do know is that the DepEd formed a task force to look at the errors sa self-learning modules. Na kung naalala natin dahil sa pandemiko, biglang mabilis ang gumawa ng self-learning modules ang DepEd sa lahat ng subject areas, hindi lang naman sa Araling Panlipunan. And dahil minadali nila lahat, syempre maraming mga lumabas na mistakes. So, maraming lumabas din sa dyaryo, sa social media, na reklamo. So, bumuo sila ng task force. But we don't have access to the findings of that committee. That the errors are reported directly to them. So, we don't know.
Any additional responses from the panel? Or okay na tayo? Sige. Let me proceed to the second question, and I think this is directed to Dr. Diokno and Professor Giang. Hello, Ma'am Diokno and Sir Giang. Two questions po. Number one, Have you talked to these publishing companies regarding revising their Araling Panlipunan textbooks, and have they responded to your requests? And number two, do your findings and recommendations make a solid basis to bring back Philippine history in the high school curriculum?
Gio, you want to?
We haven't talked to any of the publishing. We work independently with the FEU PPC. So we haven't reached out to the publishing companies. And for the second question, I think so, yes. And what is very important, if we're going to bring back Philippine history to the high school curriculum, it's very necessary for us to think about imparting necessary skills, critical thinking skills to students. Hindi lang rote memorization yung kailangan ituro, memorize ng facts, but to analyze data and information, katulad nung nabanggit ni Dr. Diokno kanina, as simple as analyzing what is fact from opinion or being critical about opinion. Because when you get exposed to different sources in Philippine history, you can definitely apply these critical thinking skills. And you will bring that after eh. We're seeing the effects ngayon eh. When you deal with sources, social media, makita mo eh kung ano ba yung skills na natutunan mo in your lower years. No? So if we're going to bring back Philippine history to high school, it's a good idea, and it's also a good idea to also expose them to the necessary skills when it comes to critical analysis. Ma'am, si Pam Mari.
Yeah, let me just clarify. No, bringing back history, laudable as it is not a cure-all for everything. You can require it. If the textbook is bad, we have the same problem. It's bad. So remember, this is a study of the textbooks, of how they teach and what they contain. And our usual is, sige, magdagdag tayo, ibalik natin. Okay, pero kung ganyan din ang textbook, kung mananatiling ganyan din ang pagturo, hindi tinuturo yung mga batayang kakayahan, mapanuring pag-iisip, etc., ganun din ang problema. So what I'm saying is, let's not approach the problem in a segmented way. Actually, if we had more time, what I really wanted to add here was that if we want to approach this problem, even just of textbooks, in a holistic and comprehensive way, fixing the textbooks is not the only solution. It's only part. There are larger and longer term and more durable solutions that we need. One, teacher education sa Araling Panlipunan. Binalikan ko yung teacher standards ng CHED para sa Araling Panlipunan. Hindi talaga required ang pag-aaral ng history. Remember, pag magtuturo ka sa elementaryang antas, let's grades 1 to 6. Okay? You take BE Ed. And the new standards in BE Ed don't require. In fact, because you have to teach all the subjects. Hindi lang AP ang ituturo mo. Pag elementary, ituturo mo history, math, science, ganyan. Tapos yung curriculum mo is not the subject. It's teaching Philippine history in this grade. Teaching math in the early grades. Teaching. So I'm not saying it's wrong to study teaching, but you already learned that in education. May pedagogical part. I'm talking about yung major courses, ganun pa rin. So we are suffering from a dearth of training in content. And hindi lang ito sa Araling Panlipunan. Based on what I looked at was the 2017 CHED memorandum. 2017, I think. Di pa siya, I haven't seen a more recent one. So ganun din sa BSE Ed. Dahil nga social studies, pwede kang kumuha ng anthro, socio-economics, social science, social studies na yon. Tapos magtuturo ka ng history. Hindi ka kumuha ng history. So, kahit na magdagdag tayo ng marami pang history, kung hindi natin sasagutin yung pangangailangan na yon sa pagsasanay ng ating mga guro, mananatili yung problemang yon. And ang ginagawa kasi natin, sinisikap nating sagutin yon sa pamamagitan ng in-service training. Kumbaga teachers na. So habang teacher may training, doon gagawin. I don't know to what extent that can help. Sa akin ang mas mabisa, pre-service. sa undergrad level pa lamang, mag-umpisa na yung training doon. And then, tingnan din yung curriculum sa graduadong antas. So, yun ang mas holistic. Kailangan din tignan na ang licensure exam ng teacher sa PRC. Pwede ka magturo ng history, pero ano yung tinatanong sa PRC exam? Tsaka, pwede ko rin idagdag, tayong mga historiador, napakalaki din ang maaring nating gawin upang tumulong sa pagpapabuti ng pagtuturo ng kasaysayan. You know, one of the questions I saw in the chat group, I don't know which teacher that is, but you asked something about, in the training, all the training I've given to public school teachers over, I don't know, all my life, where do we get that information? How do we know where to go? Iba kasi they're not trained, you're not trained as historians, so how do you know where to go? Kaya palang dali-dali magturo sa US. You know, American history, they have wonderful what they call toolbook websites put up by American Humanities Organization, very professional societies. For every chronological period, you can click the source. There is a reading guide. How do you analyze the source? There is a picture. The source is not just textual. Minsan cartoon, minsan visual, minsan a 3-minute silent film or something. It could be a coin, it could be an artifact. But it's all there. So kung ikaw ay nagtuturo, madali para sa'yo. Yun ang wala sa atin. And palagay ko, kung gustong tumulong ang mga historiador, yun ang dapat nating gawin para matulungan natin ang ating mga kapwa sa batayang edukasyon na, mas kung hindi maganda yung textbook, well, meron silang ibang magagamit. Pero, well, of course, as we say, long term. I think President Mike has a question.
Yeah. No. Actually, I'd just like to add context to this discussion kasi this project was actually commissioned by the FEU Public Policy Center, and the idea behind was we did not want to take a bureaucratic route to improving. We knew that there was a problem, but we did not want to involve DepEd or the publishers. We just wanted to see what was wrong, to craft out maybe a way forward, and for schools who are willing and for individuals who are willing to be engaged in this process. And maybe, Maris, you should discuss the training that you've also done for teachers, di ba? In the other component of this project, where where what we'd like is to build up the resources and the capability of teachers. So the creation of modules, and the questions, or how they were going to do the assessments, to also provide information for maybe many here who have not heard of the CPD training units that you provide.
Well, this is the problem when you have one proposal with Mike as at the helm of the Public Policy Center. Walang katapusan na yung project. Nanganganak siya a million times. Well, salamat. Well, we're so grateful sa FPPC for the support. So, bukod sa project na ito, sa review ng textbooks, meron din kaming sinagawang training para sa mga public school teachers. Yung unang training na ginawa namin ay tungkol sa historical significance, kasi ang napansin nga namin sa mga sinuri namin yung mga periodic tests and quizzes na binibigay sa mga estudyante, at talagang minsan tinatanong basta nasa textbook, tinatanong kahit mahalaga o hindi, kasi nasa textbook naman pwedeng itanong. Pero ang tanong namin ay, mahalaga ba yun ba ay dapat matutunan ng Filipino child? Sa lahat ng kalaman na dapat matutunan ng bata tungkol sa ating kasaysayan, halimbawa, alin ang dapat nilang talagang alam? So kailangan may sense ng appreciation of historical significance. Ano yung mahalaga? Ano yung background? And the feedback was quite good, and I think Mike will run a second one. We ran the first one in November. We'll probably run a second one on the same topic sa March, I'm not sure. Pero isang repeated request sa discussion namin sa CPD sa mga teacher, yun na nga, paano daw gumamit ng mga primary sources sa pagtuturo. So we're considering running that in the second half of the year. I'm going over pa their evaluation to see yung ibang mga comments, pero may ganoong pangangailangan.
And I just want to add that in that project, diba, in that part of the project, we really want to build a common resource for the teachers who may be attending here. Parang what we'd like is that teachers who teach history will have modules that they can use to make the teaching easier and also to give them added context, diba? I mean that's all part of let's do a crowdsourcing effort so that this parang we can be the tide that lifts all boats for everyone who's willing to engage in this project, because it cannot just be, you know, parang I think the problem is too big for any small group to do. It takes all of us, it takes the nation, I think, to improve education, improve the teaching of history. So all of us here who are concerned or in the seminar, maybe we should commit ourselves kasi ang tagal na eh. I mean, 1986, if we had moved at that time, how far would we have gone? But every time there's change, we seem to forget the responsibilities of how to move on to further the positive changes, no? And so with the inattention, we then move back, we revert to the old ways. So maybe yun nga, if people here are similarly concerned, let's really come together and create a history project for the nation.
Thank you very much for your responses, Dr. Albert, Dr. Diokno, and Professor Giang. We have been talking about pedagogy, and I think the next question by Ms. Anna Cristina Austria has something to do with some strategies on how to convey the lessons you presented to grade 5 and grade 6 students. Just a context for everyone, all of our panelists teach at the UP Department of History po, no? So sila yung nagtuturo sa kolehiyo. But anyway, let me throw in this question from Ms. Austria. What is the best way to deliver these lessons you presented to grade 5 and grade 6 students? I believe this is something to do with the nuancing that we will have to do in some or in most lessons that you presented. So how do we present a more nuanced take on Philippine history to grade 5 and grade 6 students? Would the panel have any recommendations?
Marami pang seminar yan, Jai.
Sige po. Yes, ma'am.
You know, one thing I've realized, I teach in the college. I teach in UP, but my undergrad was believe it or not, I took BSE. At that time, halata yung edad ko, ay matanda na, 67. At that time, pag mag-major ka, ang major namin ay history. Yung tiempo ko. Kaya the number of history subjects I took was equivalent to a history major of the UP History Department. That's not the case at all. I know teachers who didn't take single history outside of GE, but teach social studies, and they comply with the curriculum. Kasi ganun ang nilalaman ng curriculum. So, kung mahina ang palagay natin, halimbawa, may pagkukulang ng textbook, nagiging napakalaki ang tungkulin ng guro na harapin at wastuin yun. Pero kung ang teacher, sense niya, kulang din ang kanyang sariling training sa aspetong yon. Kasi it's not easy eh. Kung magtuturo ka ng elementary, you teach all the subjects. Paano ka mag-specialize? Tayo sa college, madali kasi specialize. Pag history lang. Then mag-specialize pa tayo. Anong klaseng history? History ng ano? Pero sa batayang sa basic ed, hindi eh. That's why I think, I don't know, pwede bang magmungkahi ng mga radical na na solusyon. I think kailangan talagang baguhin yung yung curriculum sa pagtuturo sa batayang ed. In many countries abroad, they have done away, they have seen the effects of a strong pedagogy, weak content type of training. But here, we are still steeped in a rather traditional view, and it's not easy. It's easy for us to specialize in history in the sense that, well, yan ang inaaral namin, but if you have to teach all those subjects, I cannot imagine teaching math and reading and social studies at the same time, and studying all of that when you take your undergrad. It's not easy. So I think for teachers who are already in service, ang ginagawa namin in partnership, with the FPPC, FEU Public Policy Center, talagang yung CPD training in service. Ang talagang kailangan baguhin yung pre-service, pero kailangan ng CHED at yung mga institutes of education, colleges of education. Kasi ganun din eh, mahina din ang ang dami yung questions,
All right. Dr. Diokno, I think my response was Ms. Austria. Thank you, Dr. Diokno. This makes sense. There has to be drastic changes made in training and molding the ultimate history and social studies educator. Ayun. Maraming salamat po, Ms. Austria, for your question. Let me now proceed to our next question. I think Dr. De Jesus is raising his hand, so let me acknowledge him. Sir, you have a question?
You're on mute, DJ.
Sir, you are on mute po.
You're on mute, DJ.
Okay, thanks. Unang-una, nais ko lang sabihin na sangayon ako sa sinabi ni President Mike Alba na napakalawak at napakabigat nitong problema pinakita sa atin ni Dr. Diokno at ng kanyang team. So obviously, we need to work on this on a broad front, and every little bit helps. I think it's encouraging na marami ditong na makita kong nag-a-attend ay galing sa private schools, no? Kasi ang isang siguro medyo madali na gawin at kailangan gawin ay palawakin itong na makakakita dito sa presentation ng UP team, no, for the FEU Policy Center. Dahil yung lahat ng nagtuturo ng Philippine history makakatulong ito sa kanila, no? But obviously our problems in the elementary level, and that means our concern should be in the basic in the public school system, because 95% of the elementary school students study in DepEd schools. So at some point, kailangang marating natin itong grupong ito. And I agree with President Alba, hindi maaaring bureaucratic ang approach natin. But I think it has to be maybe a political approach, because I cannot imagine that our political leaders will not be concerned about the problems that have been presented here this afternoon. And we need some lever to be able to make this effort to get some accountability for the kind of errors that are being perpetrated in the system, because obviously the problem will not improve. In fact, it's going to get worse as it goes along, no? Unless something drastic is done. So my specific suggestions then would be, number one, to have a broader dissemination of this of the materials presented this afternoon. I think we need to work with the private schools, because at least they have the flexibility to do what they can do with this problem. I think the problem with the issue with the public schools is that even if you give them the materials, unless you have permission and encouragement from the top, the teachers are not likely to want to do it, and that's simply a fact of life that we have to accept. And that is why, people have been talking about the possibility of a what do you call a congressional session again on education, that will review the entire system, and apparently our problems in the international assessment tests are making the Congress amenable to that suggestion, and maybe this is something that can be taken up in this forum. But in the meantime, I think for the private schools, there are specific steps that can be done as indicated by the team. For instance, I think one of the first steps might be to review the periodization of Philippine history. I agree with the comments that Maris made on this issue. I think we just have to prune down and reduce maybe the amount of time that we dedicate to the Spanish period, and make sure that we cover the 21st century. I agree that breaking up the 1918 period at the revolution is not helpful, and it's not going to lead to the achieving the kind of objectives that they have for history, in terms of giving the students a view of what it means to be a nation, and what
it means
to be done
free.
to make that happen. But on one issue, Maris, I agree with you that a good teacher makes a textbook unnecessary. But I think it is easier to produce a good textbook than to educate the number of teachers that we will need for the scale of problem that we have. Thank you.
Yeah, that's exactly what I said. That's our situation. We have to fix up the textbooks. Kasi kailangan talaga.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. De Jesus, for your comments, and Dr. Diokno for your response. I'd like to read a comment from Esther Garcia, President of the University of the East. And it's written here that we are a member of the TP in Science and Math. What we did at the start of senior high school is that we convinced SHED to fund the preparation of instructional materials in science and math for senior high school. These materials were prepared by scientists and mathematicians. We also had to convince DepEd to agree to use these resources. Initially, they would not agree, but in the end, they agreed. Do we have something similar for social studies, maybe, or for Araling Panlipunan? Ms. Garcia, I think that's the question that arises from the comment. I think there's also another question here in our Q&A box. Let me just read it. You have already mentioned earlier the accessibility, or the sources that need to be incorporated in the textbooks. So the question by Mr. Arnold Espinas has something to do with the sources. Sabi niya, do you think the lack of accessibility of factual sources of information, as well as the lack of orientation on the significance of research, may be contributing to all these issues on erroneous entries in the DepEd textbooks? So I think this is something to do with the access to these primary sources that you mentioned earlier. Any member of the panel can respond to this question.
Yes.
I think Dr. De Jesus has a response to that question.
Just by coincidence, I was actually looking at the materials that were presented by your colleague Maris on martial law, including that handwritten letter of diary entry of Marcos regarding the ambush on Enrile. just by coincidence. I was looking through those materials, and in the last 50 years, since the declaration of martial law, so much has been published about martial law. So many primary sources have been made available. That diary excerpt, you know, you can Google in the internet, and they are available. But let me make two points here. One, I think I mentioned accountability. You know, I mean, there has to be some penalty for all of the inaccuracies that have been perpetrated in the textbooks and have been poisoning the minds of our youth. No? We need at some point some explanation for that. But anyway, that's not my point.
If I may say so, the textbooks pre-K to 12 were worse.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. But let's
mas maganda na ito.
I think the second point that so maybe getting rid of the obvious inaccuracies is a first step. No? And here is where periodization can help, because some of the materials may not be necessarily taken up anymore if we streamline the curriculum to cover the most important items. I think what is going to be more difficult is really the issue that you raised, Maris, on moral relativism, moral equivalence. Because it's easy enough. I mean, I don't think any science course still teaches that the Earth is flat, because some people still believe that. Does that mean that we will have something in our curriculum that defends that or explains that point of view? And on several issues on martial law, there is no controversy anymore about the truth, about the factual accuracy of data. The idea that there was an ambush and really, I mean, that has been proven to be, and he has admitted it himself, although he retracted. So there are some issues that in the spirit of being neutral, people don't want to make a commitment on. They don't want to accept it as fact, but that is something that I think we have to insist on. We don't want to clutter the history texts with alternative explanations, which we know now are completely hogwash. And that has to do with, that also relates to the idea that martial law was a golden age of economic progress. But that is a more difficult, more contentious issue to tackle, especially on the level of textbooks. So I think that requires some thinking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. De Jesus. Any response from the other members of the panel? When it comes to sources, where can we find siguro some primary sources that our teachers can use in their instruction?
I'll show you what I wanted to show in my na hindi ko naipakita. As an example. Okay. If you go to this website, this is about American history, published by the National Humanities Center. They call it a toolbox library. It's done by historians, but it's used by basic ed schools, middle school and maybe high school. Each box represents a chronological period of American history. So when you click it, then you have a list of sources. I even found an article here by Aguinaldo to the American people that I hadn't read before, under this box, The Gilded and the Gritty, America 1870 to 1912. when you click it, then you have the readings, and then you click it and there's a reading guide for teachers. Ganito gagamitin, ano yung mga focus questions na pwedeng itanong, may background o context tungkol sa source na yon. Siyempre hindi alam niya ng basic ed teachers, no? So ang nasa toolbox, yun ang nagpapaliwanag. Siyempre pumipili rin sila, hindi naman yung buong source, may extract, may or it's up to the teacher to determine what paragraph you want to use when you actually teach. But this is an example. I read a comment from one of you sa chat box na nagsabing mas madali pa nga magturo ng world history kaysa Philippines. Kasi totoo ang daming websites of primary sources ng world history. Ang daming pictorials, images, cartoons, videos. Ang dali. Sa Philippine history talagang kailangan gawin natin bilang mga historiador. So something like this is easy. You by chronological period, you click and the material comes out. The teacher doesn't have to use it all, pero at least alam niya kung saan pupunta. Siyempre sa panahon natin, kailangan talagang pumili ang teachers kasi kailangan pumili ang mga historians because some of especially the old sources are not that easy reading. But we're allowed, you can respell in a modern spelling, we can translate and use, kasi even the 19th century Tagalog is spelled so differently, mga katipunan documents, maganda ring basahin. So in that course, that in the CPD program that President Mike talked about earlier, that's what I intend to do sa maybe second half of the year. But I'll probably use more sources written in Tagalog. I-respell lang kasi 19th century ang writing para magamit. But it's not easy. That's why I'm saying yung ganung klaseng toolbox, mga historiador ang dapat mag-construct niyan in collaboration with basic ed teachers para may ideya kung ano yung magagamit, ano yung appropriate o angkop, saan sa curriculum pwedeng gamitin, etc. Mas masalimuot ang mga konsiderasyon kung gagamitin sa batayang edukasyon. But to be honest, even in college, hindi naman masyadong gumagamit ng primary source. Come on, admit it, colleagues. GE history, you don't use it. We should. But I show hindi ginagamit. And we should, matagal na nating sinasabi. Hindi ginagamit. So dapat talaga mas madali pa nga pag college level. Pero iba rin kasi yung I've been studying this for centuries. If you look at curricula in different countries in the world, Canada, UK, and certain schools in the US, they're the most progressive would be Canada, but they start them young, grade 1 lang. Yung iba, medyo masalimot. But let's not feel so, when you read about it in other countries, they also have terrible problems. They have serious textbook wars. Many of the wars are politicized, but malaking away reach the level of state law, which is much harder to battle against. So textbooks are also political documents in the end. There's a question there from somebody, one of you, na paano aayusin yung section ng martial law kung manalo si Marcos. Sino ba? May nakita ko sa chat box, may nagtanong, yes, paano daw aayusin? Nakita mo ba, Kirby? May tanong paano daw aayusin kung si Marcos mismo ang manalo? Madali lang, dapat hindi siya manalo kung gusto natin.
That's from Mr. Coco Alquaz, ma'am, of Makati Business Club. Yeah, that question.
Yeah, but actually, yes, talagang dapat ayusin. Saka mas madali ngayon, more information has come out. Tama yung sinabi ni DJ, madaming information. Problema, ang dami. So if you're an elementary school teacher teaching all those subjects, ang dami-daming Siyempre, maganda yung style like sa US, may toolbox, nandun lahat. Click ka na lang. And there are many, the one I showed you from the American Humanities Org, that's only one. I have found similar toolboxes published by online, open access, published by so many other historical associations and history departments in the US. Ang dami. So, the more the merrier, because kung ikaw ang teacher, madaling mag-shop, pwede kang pumili. Pero organized.
Yeah.
Hindi yung ngayon talagang i-google, hahanapin mo kung hindi ka sanay, ubos ang araw mo sa kahanap lang. Pero doon ang dami, organisado. So, ibig sabihin lang maraming trabaho. Huwag tayong give up. Ako retired na sige pa rin Hindi pa gumi-give up. Kayo mas bata. Sige pa rin.
Thank you, Dr. Diokno. Any other responses or insights from our panelists regarding the sources? Yes, Dr. Alvarez.
Just a quick note. Okay, we can identify or we can provide you a list of all the websites na pwede pagkunan ng primary sources. But then again, sabi nga ni Dr. Diokno, kailangan sobrang specialized niya. Okay?
Hindi siya makakatulong
hindi siya pang again, kung isa kang basic education teacher, okay, it will take a lot of time para aralin itong mga to. Kahit sabihin natin, kumuha ka ng document sa pares, kahit kumuha ka ng document.
Hindi. Huwag mo lang pag-usapan yung pares.
Ang hirap niya for historians and
I'm talking about websites for teachers, not for historians.
Yes,
ang tinutukoy mo mga historiador ang gumagamit niyan. Okay lang sa atin. Pero pag sa basic ed, hindi pwede. Hindi kailangan organized. Katulad ng pinakita ko.
Yes, ma'am.
Yun ang ginagamit. Tapos nakatukoy siya sa USB. Ito pwedeng gamitin sa middle school. Ito sa junior high. Ito sa senior high. Tapos meron din sila sa mga lower grades. Ganun ka Kaya hindi pwedeng historian lang ang magtrabaho. Kailangan in tandem with basic ed. Kasi kung iwanan mo yung historian, bibigyan niyo, basahin mo Blair and Robertson. O di na wala na. Hindi pa nag-uumpisa ang teacher, give up na. 54 volumes, ilan bang Blair and Robertson? Online na yun. English na yun, translated na, annotated pa. Hindi madaling gamitin. May iba, tingnan niyo yung mga website na, yung sites na tinukoy ko, yun ang tinutukoy ko. Hindi yung para sa historiador. Kailangan yung para sa basic course.
During your time sa NHCP, we made the e-learning resources. But unfortunately, I was checking the website of the NHCP. Hindi na siya naka-up. So, sayang po. So, it's really good.
Yun ang project ko, no? I got you guys to help me. Pero hindi na tinuloy Yeah.
Yes.
Hindi na tinuloy, sayang. Pero pwede pa nating buhayin. Marami pa tayong trabaho. Basta wag lang tayo gi-give up. Sige nang sige. We keep
Thank you, Dr. Alvarez and Dr. Diokno. I guess the challenge here is how do we translate or organize all these data, overwhelming data we see in the internet, dahil hindi naman lahat yan ay credible, hindi naman lahat yan pwede magamit. Yung mga magagamit naman sobrang voluminous, so we have to narrow them down to what we can actually use in our classes. Thank you very much for your responses. Let me now proceed to a more difficult and dare I say a controversial question. Since Ma'am Maris already mentioned earlier the question that was from Mr. Coco Alquaz of the Makati Business Club, let me throw in a question that's somewhat related to that. Sabi dito, how should we deal with the pro-Marcos teachers in elementary who refuse to talk about the truths or the essential truths about the martial law era? And I think that's a reality. Anyone who'd like to take on that question?
Kayo. Ako may sagot, pero kayo muna.
Well, isa sa mga bagay na point out ng project, whether you are inclined to a certain political belief or ideology, whether you're conservative or part of the left, ganyan. Mainam na basic, batayan, nandun yung skill. You provide evidence, you support your interpretations or analysis with substantial information. So yun yung kailangang ituro sa mga bata. Well, okay. So paano deal with the pro-Marcos teachers, again, kagaya sabi ni Ma'am Maris kanina, okay, hindi pwedeng basta-basta pagsagkain ang dalawang opinion dahil hindi lagi sila magkatumbas. So we need to point that out na mahalagang tingnan na iba tingnan ang panahon ng batas militar, for example, in the holistic manner. Hindi lang dahil sa isang particular na geographical area ay ganito yung pininiwalaan, ganito yung nangyari, di ba? So historical empathy, hindi dahil hindi naranasan, hindi dahil maayos, quote-unquote, ng lipunan at that time, ay okay na sa ibang bahagi ng lipunan. So, okay, pairalin natin ang historical empathy, that's one. So, I think that's one that can be done. So, historical empathy, na hindi dahil tahimik, quote-unquote, ay okay na because other areas, other groups of people suffered a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Alvarez. Anyone else from the panel?
Maris,
I think
what's
Dr.
your
Diokno
answer?
has an answer.
Yeah, actually, that's really a problem. Means, and ang nagkwento pa sa akin taga DepEd mismo, that there was one session I went to the DepEd, I gave a talk or something, and then I don't know, in a subsequent session, nakalaon ng malaking debate. So many pala of the teachers are, I don't know what many is, but are for martial law or for Marcos. So this is why the textbooks have to be correct. Because as I said, the textbook is as much for the teacher as it is for the student. So the textbooks have to be correct. All the segments, the topics that have been silenced, you know what, they don't even talk about Marcos plunder. Kung may reference, ang sinasabing nilustay ang kaban ng bayan. Hindi pa alam, ang dami ng court cases. So, show the cases, get excerpts from the result, translate it into Filipino, simplify the ruling, the language. Ganon. Para walang question. These are facts. Supreme Court na nagsasabi nun. Hindi si DJ at hindi rin ako. Supreme Court na nagsasabi nun. Sandigan Bayan ruling. Hindi sabi-sabi. Ruling talaga yon. Kailangan lahat yan. Economic data, nandun lahat. Kailangan nandun. Para matuto rin ng mga, hindi lang teacher, well, estudyante pati teacher, na mag-analyze ng data. Because we're not going to convince them by telling them this way or that way. Just show the evidence and then, okay, what's your answer? Pag nandun, ang problema, this is what we were trying to point out earlier, that even the textbooks that are critical of martial law, which we did not see before so much, there are, but kulang yung evidence. So if you are a teacher with a different sentiment, kasi nga, it's an opinion, it's a sentiment, if you're a teacher of a different persuasion, you will not be persuaded by that textbook, because it doesn't provide you the anchor, the historical evidence on which you can base your ground. So when they ask students exercises, ganun din. Gusto mo, hindi mo gusto. Parang ganun, walang ang babaw ng level of skill. Walang not even an effort to analyze. But if the evidence is there, in fact, I was debating this, DJ, you might be interested, because I was debating whether, the justiciability of martial law. So I went back to the Haveliana versus Executive Secretary, which was the ruling of the Supreme Court regarding the 1973 Constitution, in which they never said martial law was valid. What they said was there being no more barrier or obstacle. Okay? So, but then I was thinking, first I consulted I asked a lawyer, can you give me a simple word explanation nito? Because I said, I gave him several examples. Yung pagkaunawa ko, kasi baka mali, hindi naman ako abogado. Then I said, busy lang siya eh. Meron siyang mga current cases na hinahandle eh, hindi ko makulit. Sabi niya, sige. And then I was thinking, paano isasalin in a way, yun ang tinutukoy ko ng developmentally appropriate, in a way na maunawaan ng estudyante, pero syempre ng teacher din. Kasi mahirap din yung very legalistic na lengguwahe. Iba kasi when we enter the arena of basic ed, sometimes we have to shed off some of them. I'm not saying we retain the training as a historian, but we broaden the arena of considerations we have to address. When we teach, as historians, we usually don't have to worry about that. But sa basic ed, you lose the message if we fail to consider these things. And I've always believed, that students can understand anything if we teachers can explain it. I've always believed that. Kung kayang paliwanag ng teacher, magigets ng estudyante. Ngayon, kung hindi alam ng teacher, hindi niya maintindihan, syempre, paano maintindihan ng bata? So I think it's that we reconstruct that section of martial law and put those facts. What we presented to you in our study, we only looked at selected themes, the reasons for imposing martial law, what do you call it, Marcos plunder, the ratification, yung mga ganon, selected. But there are many others. Hindi na namin kayang i-present dito. No, but there are many other aspects. At every point, there is an opportunity to bring it in. Ang wish ko lang, hindi kasi kaya sa public school sector yung online interactive. Kasi tama si DJ, ang daming one of my favorite primary sources is an interview by Imelda herself. The best interview. Kasi siya mismo, kinikwento niya bago siya umalis ng palace. Sabi niya, 50 cases ng Louis Vuitton jewelry. Sabi niya. Siya mismo, binilang niya, we had 50 cases of this, ganyan. And imagine, we had to leave all of that when we rushed out of the palace. Sabi ko, well, believe that. You don't have to interrogate anyone. The primary source herself, eyewitness, key historical actor. Siya mismo nagsabi, how can you debate with that? Wala naman tayo dun sa bedroom nila sa palace. Sabi niya kasi nakatago lang sa ilalim ng kama. Yung mga cases ng Louis Vuitton jewelry. Siya, paano ko alam yun? Hindi naman ako nakatingin dun, Pero siya nakikwento sa interview niya. Sabi ko, galing nito. Wala na, pakita mo lang yun. Clear. Hindi na sila magsasabi, yung sinasabing pag-lose. Kumbaga na doon, ang dami. Siguro yun ang hamon sa atin na tignan lahat ito and isipin. Kasi each one of us, we have our own favorites. Ako, I have some of my own favorite sources to teach, primary sources to teach martial law. And I don't have to talk much. Pakita. Then it's the processing. Yun ang worry. Doon papasok yung ng teacher. Yung processing. Kasi kung katulad lang yan ng mga exercises na pinakita ko, tumayo kung ayaw mo, manatiling nakaupo kung gusto mo, walang processing, bakit mo ayaw, bakit mo gusto, wala. Basta tayo upo. Ako hindi pwede yun. Walang learning doon. Exercise lang ng bata, tumayo, upo. Yun lang. So, it can be done. Talagang let's admit it, we really made a mistake. We didn't do this and start this in 86. When we should have, it would have been entrenched na by now, no? Pero hindi nating, ewan ko ba. Well, not too late.
Thank you, Dr. Diokno. That question, by the way, was from Alec Hope Benaventura. So thank you very much, Mr.
Did we give Alec Hope some hope?
Yes. Thank you very much. I think Dr. De Jesus has an insight to share.
I put my hand down already. But sabi nga ni Maris, at ito sinasabi rin ng mga psychology experts and those who are experts in social media, parang hindi na sapat yung evidence. Parang the truth doesn't matter anymore once people have been brainwashed, no? So they won't even look at the materials. Gaya nung sinasabi mo, I agree with you.
Yes.
Yung mga sinasabi ni Imelda, that may be more persuasive if you can persuade people, if you can get people to look at them. So if that question of was it Coco Alquas who asked that question, how do you deal with the Marcos followers? I think dealing with the Marcos followers is a long, arduous, labor-intensive effort. I think at this point, the pressure has to be to get Marcos Jr. himself to address the issues, and he has an obligation. He's a presidential candidate, for heaven's sakes. No? But that pressure has to be intensified so that he actually starts to talk to people on a public platform. I think that's the best way that you can expose all of these items so that the followers still believe in. Thank you.
But DJ, you're talking about choices of materials in general. I'm not talking about choices. I'm talking about the textbook that is used in class.
Yeah, but Maris, we don't have the textbooks yet.
No, we're talking about
what happens between now and May.
Well, that's a different question, now and May. I know what we want to do between now and May, but
and part of it is to get Bongbong to talk. Marcos Jr.
Hindi nga magpa-interview, magsalita.
Precisely.
Oh, Diyos ko. Anyway, marami
Alright.
pa mga tanong dyan.
Yes, I think we have one more question po. Let's try to entertain one more question. Somewhat related to the previous two questions. What is your stand on censorship applied to textbooks subjected in the study that may be used as an excuse to some twisted and inaccurate content only to become age appropriate? This is from Raven Lester Esperanza. This is the last question for this afternoon.
Kayo, you want to respond?
Well, we're not completely familiar with the idea of censorship. Okay, baka ang mas appropriate term ay pinapalabnaw. Okay, sa excuse na hindi pa kayang grasp or i-absorb ng bata. Pero yun nga, babalik tayo dun sa idea na mahalaga i-train, okay, using developmentally appropriate materials, okay, yung skills. Okay, at doon papasok yung halagang role ng teachers. Again, okay, isang malawak, habang problema. Ngunit I think ay pwede pa rin engage at pwede magsimula yan doon sa idea na i-reform natin yung textbooks. Okay, so at yun pa lang, doon sa unang step pa lang yan ay malaking trabaho na. So I think yun po ang aking take on that.
Thank you, Dr. Alvarez. Dr. Diokno?
I'm not really sure. We looked at 14 textbooks, 7's a grade 5, 7's a grade 6. Of those 14, only 2 were public school textbooks. So the rest were private. So private schools have power. Don't patronize it. Don't buy the textbooks. Don't make the publishers rich or the textbook writers rich. No? I think, is it, I'm not sure it's censorship. I think maybe it's lack of competence. I don't know. Hindi nag-research ng mabuti, maraming mali. No? In fact, the DepEd textbooks, as I said, are much better now than before. They're really, I mean, it's much easier to address, I think, kung open pa sila sa correction. You know why they improved? Remember when we did this study before? Anong year ba yon, Kirby? Hindi ko na maalala.
2008, 2009. Funded by CEFIS. No?
I brought in a grant. I got a grant from CEFIS. So, nag-attend yung mga textbook writers and they apologized. And they were writing for the DepEd. I know them because some of them were from UP, College of Education. Kilala ko sila. So, medyo nahiya, ganon. So, nag-improve. Pero hindi pa sapat. Remember, we were referring all the time to different textbooks, but if there's any censorship, maybe some publishers self-censor. They have an internal policy, stay away from politically sensitive topics, or treat them both sides fairly. Ganon. Baka ganon. I don't know that there is nung time kasi nung tinatalakay yung K to 12, walang textbook eh. Bumalik lang yung textbook, ito na eh. Ewan ko, hindi ko na maalala kung kailan bumalik ito. So, pwede pang ayusin, palagay ko. And as for the private schools, be more discriminating in your choice of the textbooks you buy and prescribe for your school. Ang dami niyan eh. Meron akong kilalang textbook writer, ilang bahay na daw niya, ilang kondo na daw ang nabili niya sa textbook writing. Yeah, sinasabi niya yan sa public. Oh, galing niya, no? So, yun, may may commercial side yan. Kaya pwede rin silang tamaan dyan. Don't patronize.
Yeah.
If you think it's not good. Ang mas dyan yung sa DepEd dahil yun ay prescribed sa lahat sa buong pampublikong sektor. Yun ang dapat talagang. Pero na-identify naman natin yung mga weaknesses noon. So yun, pwede natin sigurong that time kasi pinadala natin sa DepEd ba yung findings natin. I think I sent it to them eh. Kasi ang tiningnan ko natin yung DepEd textbooks. So, from grade 1 up to grade, yung old pre-K to 12. Hindi lang we didn't look lang at economics, but all the rest we looked at it. I sent it to the DepEd. Here we haven't sent any. So, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Diokno and Dr. Alvarez. If there are no more insights from our panelists, I believe that concludes our open forum for this afternoon. There are several more questions in the Q&A, but unfortunately, we cannot entertain them anymore today, at least during the policy forum this afternoon.
May I ask though, FPPC, Erica or Julia, the comments in the chat group, can you collect them and maybe organize them by topic so we can review them? Because some of them have suggestions and thoughts, and some of the teachers here express their own concerns and challenges sa pagtuturo. And I think they can also help us understand the situation better. So may I ask that the team do that kung okay lang, Mike, and then organize by categories and send it to us.
We were consolidating real time. So we will send it to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Don't send it to me raw, ha? Andaya. Organize na. Because I know you'll just send it chat raw or by theme so that it's easy for us to put together. Importante rin. And we get ideas from you, even if we can't entertain all your questions. Those of you who have been teaching in basic ed, you know the situation, and much of my own learning in my career in helping the teachers teach history, much of my learning has really come from you, because my own teaching career has been in university and quite privileged, UP. So, but my exposure has really broadened my world, and I thank you all for that. The team, we thank you all for that.
Thank you, Dr. Diokno. Yes, you were actually consolidating the questions and the comments earlier. I was reading from a Google sheet prepared by the team. Thank you very much. So that was a very dynamic and engaging discussion. We certainly wish to continue the discussion on ensuring that our youth actually gain access to factual, accurate information about Philippine history. At this point, we cannot emphasize enough how we are very grateful for everyone's participation in today's forum. Let us hear a few words from those who made this virtual event possible. And with that, I would like to invite Ms. Julia Andrea R. Abad, Executive Director of FEU Public Policy Center, for a few final words to formally put the forum to a close.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. History provides us with a sense of identity. In order to successfully move forward, nations and societies need to develop a sense of their collective past. Events in our past have made us who and what we are today. And it is important for us to understand these events, what they are, why they happened, and what they subsequently led to, in order to make sense of where they have brought us collectively as a people. A shared identity forms the basis for our individual and collective actions and decisions as citizens. And so we cannot emphasize enough how important it is for this identity to be based on an undisputed rendering of facts. We thank the team of Dr. Maris Diokno for the hard work they have put in to help us begin to understand the basis on which our students are learning history. And we are delighted to see that so many of you have chosen to spend your afternoon to discuss their research with us. Correcting historical inaccuracies, emphasizing the importance of primary sources and making them more widely available, rectifying the tendency towards both sidesism, being able to determine when a political discussion is also one that is critical to learning, and ensuring that reference materials provide a solid foundation for civic-mindedness and civic action are only some of the important actions we can take as learnings from this discussion. On behalf of the trustees and staff of the FEU Public Policy Center, we thank you for today's very active and very lively, very informative discussion. And we look forward to continuing this conversation into avenues of collaboration with you in the coming days. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Ms. Julia, for your message. And our fondest gratitude to all our participants, our resource speakers, Dr. Kirby Alvarez, Professor Francisco Jaime Guiang, Professor Dondi Ramos II, Mr. Aaron Viernes,
my text.
and of course, Professor Emeritus Maria Serena I. Diokno,
I didn't get anything. I don't know whether...
for sharing your expertise and valuable insights with all of us here today. That concludes our policy forum. Thank you very much for your time and participation. This has been Jairo Heria of the UP Department of History. Stay safe, everyone, and we will see you in our next policy forum. Maraming salamat po.